I had a great drive, and then more shots after that. We got to change the same I got 4 yards short of the lead on the second shot out of par 5.
Share the fun. I'm ready there.
How we doing?
That's your goal. It's attainable.
For 2 more
No.
weeks.
Yep.
Projects like that too.
I'd like to call to order the City Council study session for October 23rd, 2017. And not only study session, but our study focus area is municipal services. And we'll move to roll call.
Deputy Mayor Wells.
Here.
Councilmember Baggett.
Here.
Councilmember DeCoursey.
Here.
Councilmember Holman.
Here.
Councilmember Pelosi.
Here.
Councilmember Trout Manuel.
Here.
Councilmember Wagner.
Here.
Okay. Do we have any announcements, reports, or presentations other than what's listed here?
No, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Then we are going to move into our first item on the agenda for council discussion, resolution number 5320, and we have Director Faber to start us off.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Wales. I'm going to be joined tonight by Nancy Colson and Lee Valenta, who you guys know from the years of service to the Auburn Symphony Orchestra.
And everything else.
And everything else they do in our community. But tonight we have the annual return for the contracted services with the orchestra that the City of Auburn has provided funding for. Funding's in the amount of $75,000. It's paid over 3 separate periods. The city's financial calendar, January through December, doesn't match the symphony's calendar, but we make 2 payments and then 1 based on the previous year's performances. As you recall, there's a scope of work, and included in it was the performance from this last period, which includes the last half of last year and the first half of this year. So that's a little confusing, but they've had some changes in their program that they made aware of last year, which really led to a successful season. I met with them last week, and it was really exciting to hear about their gains. So they're here to talk a little bit about why we continue to fund the symphony and why it's important to our community.
Hey, thank you very much. And Lee's going to talk a little bit more about the conductor search for a new conductor, which has been actually pretty exciting. It was unexpected, and as it turned out, it gave the symphony and the board and the audience and the community a lot of excitement around what was happening. The first thing that I want to focus on is our focus on outreach to the community, and we convened a focus group and had them look at our mission and our visions for the community and give us input, and Yolanda Trout was one of the people who participated in that. And as a result of the input from that group, which included one of our musicians, several people from the community, and Jim Kelly from For Culture actually came down and participated in that. So he's a good friend to the symphony as well. So our mission says that the Auburn Symphony Orchestra changes lives in our South Puget Sound community through the experience of live classical music performances and by nurturing the relationship between our audience and our artists. And then we had several breakouts from that statement, and we wanted the focus group to tell us if that resonated, your favorite word, Daryl, with them. And so as a result of that, we ended up with three focuses. One is engagement, patron to artist, artist to patron, patron to patron, in other words, the audience and the artists. Inclusion, to make sure our current patrons feel welcome, included, and engaged. Outward, learn about the needs and interests of potential patron communities that we don't know. And inclusion also includes welcome. Anyone with an interest in live orchestra or chamber music feels at home at an ASO performance, Auburn Symphony Orchestra performance. The first time they show up and every time after that, that they feel welcome. And the third concept is relating, meaning relating to all ages, all generations, all patrons, be as relational to the community as we can be. And so we're working on that. We've created a work plan around that, and the first thing that I want to talk about as a result of this focus group input is collaborations that we've created with various community groups and performances of small Auburn Symphony Orchestra ensembles to give people easy access to smaller performances. One of which is the summer concerts at Mary Olson Farm, which we have continued to do, and those are wonderful. It's a win-win for the orchestra and for Mary Olson Farm, because people come to the farm who've never been there before, and people come to hear the orchestra and they didn't know the farm existed, and it's been a really wonderful program. And we we've provided musicians to play with Valley Creative Arts, playing at 2 of the art walks at their invitation. And we had a string trio at the Chamber of Commerce Awards dinner recently. And we've had a concert, after many conversations with Trek Apartments, we had a small concert there. So, and the last thing that I wanted to talk about in terms of outreach is we've talked a long time about having a kind of a kickoff celebration for the season, to invite people to come and have some hors d'oeuvres and talk about what's upcoming for the new season. And so we did that this year. We have a patron who wanted us to create an event that would include art and the music. And so we had a party. We had about 80 people at a party at Messiah Lutheran Church's gathering hall. And we had a musician there who played little bits from the upcoming season to, kind of show people what was coming for the season. We had wine and food, and it was free. And it was free. It was a free event. And one of the elements, so the art element, we talked to Mary Ellen Bowers and said, what do you think about some kind of an art piece for this event? And so she said, oh, that's interesting, as she often says. So we gave her a copy of the season ticket brochure that had all the concerts in it, and she was quite taken with the Planets, which is on the agenda for the April concert. And she said, let me work on that. And so what we did, if you're familiar with what Mary Ellen does, sometimes she creates kind of an outline of a piece, and then she encourages people to participate, and she has little pots of paint and Q-tips, and you can make little dots of color. So we had people participating in doing that, and then we had a couple of other, we had a little morning at Zola's after that, where people were encouraged to participate. And so I wanted to show you the end result, because I think we're going to, are you going to get that for me?
I can be your Vanna.
Oh, good. The end result, and yes, that's the way it goes. And so what we're going to do is sell raffle tickets and give people the opportunity to win this at the end of the season.
It's for our television audience also.
Oh, yes.
I heard raffle tickets.
So it was fun, and Mary Ellen actually contributed her efforts to do that. So it was a fun party. We called it the Prelude to the Season, and I think we've learned a few things from doing that, and I think it's a good outreach opportunity, so we'll probably do that again. So, Lee.
Several of you have always been interested in what we do for kids, education and young people, and we're certainly interested in it as well. And in the past, we struggled and tried to figure out what to do and how to do more of it, et cetera. So I wanted to do a little quick report on what we feel like we're currently doing for students. One of the things we used to do, which the former conductor did, was he included some kids who were quite talented to play in the orchestra. he would go and audition in the schools and choose some kids, and they would, well, he's not been available or around, so we've had guest conductors, and we haven't been able to do that for the last couple of seasons, you know. And so at some point, hopefully our new music director will think that's a good idea, and we will continue that. And I'll get back to that concept in a second. But the first thing I want to tell you, remind you about the $10 tickets for orchestra students in the in the Auburn schools. And the nice thing here is that as we have said before, the kids won't come if they're 13 years old. They're not going to come by themselves and have their parents accompany them and have the parents pay $35 or $38 and have them pay $10. And so we've made a policy that any kid who brings, any orchestra kid who brings their family member, a number of family members, the family member also pays $10. And so this way, there's a growing interest in that. It's the three middle schools, or all the middle schools, and then the three high schools have that at their disposal. And we've been doing that right along, and the idea is to try to get more teachers to promote it. We started a program last year, the education program, the outreach, and we were inviting second graders to a special program on a Saturday at St. Matthew's Episcopal Church, and we were doing like 4 elementary schools at a time and trying to go through the idea of promoting the little 1-hour program for the little kids, and obviously a parent would be driving them through the schools. And it was very difficult because of the nature of the way the schools, you have to advertise through Peachtree, and it's only through email, et cetera, et cetera. So we couldn't directly contact the parents, and because we think we would have had a lot better response. And the reality of it is we hardly had any response at all. I mean, 5, 8 kids. And so we did that for the first 2 programs, and then we thought, no, this isn't working, so we better change it. So then what we tried is we went to Alpac Elementary, and we presented to all the second grades at Alpac Elementary, and we had access to 90 kids. And so this year, I mention that because this year we're doing the program again, but we've chosen 6 elementary schools. We've chosen the 4th grades, and we're going to all 6 schools. We're bringing the musicians to the schools. Initially, we wanted to do it the other way because we felt like the parents would be with the kid and they would be supportive. But in the absence of that being successful, we thought it'd be important to get to the kids. So.
Well, I think that's really wise to do it with 4th graders because that's when the music programs start.
Exactly.
And it's the kids that go home and say, Dad, I think I want to play a flute. So I think that was, it's great to see how nimble you are in trying things and then trying something else. It seems to have paid off.
And the musicians like it, and so we're doing 6, and we've got the 6 schools. And, you know, what we don't do this year, we'll do more, 6 different schools next year. Back to the kids being involved in the program. This year we have a guest conductor for our Christmas program, Anthony Spain. And when I talked to him last summer, he wanted to have a lot of kids involved in the Christmas program because he felt like when the kids are there, they bring their parents, their families. And it's like, okay, we've tried that before, but you know, we'll see. And so we've got orchestra students auditioned from Mountain View, Auburn High School, and Riverside High School. So there'll be about 3 or 4 string players from each of those schools. Then he wanted to, you know, Christmas has choirs, so we're having the Rainier Chorale and the Adventist Academy choir. There'll be 19 kids from there, and that's the first time that we've ever reached out to them or had something to do with them, and I know you've mentioned that before, and so I'm glad that we were able to do that this year. So we've got kids all over the place, and we'll see whether or not the Christmas program or the holiday program attracts more people. And then finally, this is partially Nancy's idea. We got a small grant, and we need more money for it, but we got a small grant from the Washington State Arts Commission for this Planets program in April. And what we said we would do is provide an extra rehearsal just for students to come to the Planets program. The reason why we're doing this is because in addition to the music, there is a gentleman from, a brilliant man from the East Side who used to work for Microsoft, went to Oxford, and he's created a visual program that goes along with the music. And there have been other programs like this before that you show pictures of outer space and all that kind of stuff. But in this case, he's synchronized it to the music. And so it's going to be pretty exciting at the Performing Arts Center. And so initially we were going to involve, you know, some fifth graders and have them bust. But Nancy had the idea of zeroing in on Dick Scobie Elementary School because of the space connection. And so I've talked to Adam, the principal there, and he's really excited. And so at least the kids from Dick Scobie. And then Largo had a suggestion about the Viz Ed kids, because, you know, something in addition to the kids around space, the space study and all of that, that maybe because of the visual representation that the Viz Ed kids would be interested as well. So we're probably going to do that. I mean, we have lots of room at the PAC, so we can invite all kinds of kids, but we're trying to figure out how to target. Maybe the orchestra kids from Auburn High School might want to walk across the hall, you know, and come. And then so that's what we're doing around the education stuff.
I see that your database, this last year, you collected 312 new people for your database. That's
Exactly.
incredible.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Anytime somebody new comes in, we get all their information, whether they like it or not. And then just to update you, the last part is to update you on the conductor search. We actually had 4 candidates, and about 2 months ago, the 4th candidate, not one who's already conducted and rehearsed and had his opportunity, but the one who didn't, who was going to conduct in February, removed his name from the competition because he has a conflict with another orchestra that he apparently had committed to before. So our 3 finalists are already done, and we only have one more assignment, which I've given them, and that is for them to create what would be their first program for all next year. In other words, program the year. Because we've been giving them the programs and telling them what to conduct, pretty much. And now they're going to be able to say, okay, if I were the conductor or the music director, this is what we would do for the year. So they have to get that to me, to us in the next several weeks. And after that, we have the collection of the evaluations of all the musicians who played for each of the people. We have the evaluations from the audience members. So there's at least 180 to 200 of each of those, which is great. People are still mailing them in. I'm still getting them. We have the search committee, of which there's 8 members, 2 board members and me, 3 musicians and 2 community members. And then we have the board evaluations, because each of the gentlemen have interviewed with both the board separately and then the search committee. Different questions, different interests, et cetera. And so we think we might have a decision by the end of the year, which is not all that long. And I don't know how we're going to announce it or when we're going to announce it. We'd like to make a little splash, and hopefully Robert will be involved and write a story for us.
And that the new conductor will start at the beginning of the 18-19 season. So we'll have guest conductors for the balance of this season. But it's been an exciting, and people say, why does it take so long? And it takes
People, Daryl.
Well, besides Daryl.
Daryl, yeah,
other
other
people
people
have
have
questioned
asked,
it. So it's a long, and we used a very intentional and deliberate process too. We had the gentleman who's actually retired from Intel, I think, who was involved with the Tacoma Symphony search for their new conductor several years ago. So they had an excellent platform for us to work from. A larger organization, so we just scaled it back to fit us, but it's given us an excellent map for getting to this goal. So we're really excited. We have 3 excellent candidates. It's going to be a tough decision, but we're excited. So.
Any questions?
Yes,
Councilmember Pelosi.
thank you. for you, Dan, on the contract for services, page 1. Page 1. 3B for boy. On the 75,000, can you add the .00? Then we'll be consistent with the other
Did you put
quantities in
the
that.
zeros before the point?
Even one.
You are quick. Quick.
Okay, that's for Dan. On page 6 of 6 of attachment A, page 6 of 6. Regarding phase 3, the last bullet, summary of annual fundraiser. I've heard a rumor that the gala may be in Kent next year. And we just had it here in Auburn. So can you explain to the council why you're moving back to out of the city?
Do you want to?
No, go for it.
We had a difficulty with the college's policy around having the wine tasting at the same time as having a bar, a separate bar. They were quoting some Washington State Liquor Board control rules that we were not necessarily in agreement with, but it ended up being just an impasse. And we regretfully made the decision to go back to Camp Meridian this year, Meridian Valley Country Club. And the reality is we have, our orchestra is really a regional orchestra. It's Auburn Symphony, but it draws people from, we have people who come from Everett, Bellevue, Olympia, Vancouver, Washington. So and several of our board members actually live in Kent. So, it's not a bad thing to have it in that location occasionally. But we do intend to bring it back to Auburn. We've got some.
Well, the response about the facility was extraordinary. I mean, everybody loved the college. So it had nothing to do with, it was incredibly successful. Mm-hmm. It had to do with the wine stuff. Apparently, they have a different kind of a license. The caterer has a different kind of a license than, say, Meridian Valley. That's a restaurant and a bar and has a, so it was bizarre. I mean, believe me, we spent hours discussing this
and trying to make it work.
Yeah.
We really did. So.
Well, again, I want to commend you on your flexibility of, you seem to be always trying something new. When it doesn't work, you adjust and you make it to your favor.
Yep.
We'll come back.
And what I really like, I think that what you did with the selection process of making it into lemonade and that was just a shot in the arm of, let's celebrate this opportunity, and excellent marketing. Any other questions? Okay,
Yeah.
Bill.
I'm still sorting through there. There's no page, but it's your October 18th annual report. This is page 18. October 18th. The third bullet about the fourth sentence. The event netted approximately $45,000 in revenue. And then if you look at your balance sheet, the last page, your profit and loss. You look at the income side on page 1 of 2. You go down to about the middle. It's got total gala, 32,000. So I'm assuming then 45 to 32 that your expenses for the gala was around 13,000, 12, 13,000.
They were a little bit less than that. No, the discrepancy is that it just has to do with how we report the money. Historically on the budget and on the P&L, on the profit and loss. We put the revenue generated from the gala being tickets, raffle, auction, and sponsorships, and that adds up to a certain amount of money. The money that we get from Raise the Paddle goes into individual I mean, it's just a different way of accounting for it, individual donations. So for the purposes of this report, when I actually said, this is what we made at the gala. And it was a combination of the two revenue sources minus the expenses. So that's how it got to be. It was about $23,000. To Raise the Paddle was about $23,000.
So you might want to consider next year showing gala expenses separately so that we're not, so it doesn't reflect apples and oranges. I mean, that'd be a better.
Yeah, we got board members who made that request also. Good observation, Bill. Thank you.
My other question is on the printing, and I know printing is very expensive from my own experience. Do you bid the printing out, or you locked into one company, or how's that work?
Shop local. So our experience with something like printing is like for the give you an example. For the posters, there's a company who, if you send them the image, they'll have the poster done in an hour. And it's a case of me going to pick it up in Seattle, and it's cheap. For the programs and everything else, we go local because I can, at the last minute, bring it to them, and they'll respond. Whereas if you try to go get it cheaper, you can, but you have to have everything done like weeks in advance so that they have the time, and that's the reason why it's more expensive.
Okay.
But no, the answer, we don't bid it out.
Okay. Perfect. On page 2 of 2, you show use of city funding. That's a column, right? But next time, can you make it accounting format like your other column? Like a $, 1,000, comma, 493, period, 00, or cents? Just
He was thinking it was the year of my birth.
that way it just.
Yeah, it doesn't look like the random number that's just sitting there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then I have one last, see, I read this stuff. Right?
I appreciate your interest.
Look at, let's see, this is not numbered. It's up at the very top, it says ticketing, discounted tickets, and then you have 2 blocks. Right? Then the one I thought was very good was percentages of purchases, percentage of tickets, you know. Next year, can you show this year's 2016, 2017 column? And then next year, 2017, 2018.
Oh, you want to say a comparison?
So we can compare.
Yeah.
I think
Oh,
yeah. I mean, even your board members aren't like that.
yeah. And we got the capacity to do that because it's right off the database.
No, I understand that. That's it, thank you.
Councilmember Wagner.
Do you have a vision statement, or is it essentially the first paragraph of the page?
We do, actually, and I read the mission statement and the vision at this moment, and we're working on this. We're probably going to revise this based on the input that we got from the focus groups. But our vision is a community connected and nourished through the majesty and beauty of live orchestral music. Our future includes our diverse community reflected in our performances, an environment of authentic engagement and connection in all its varied forms, a new generation of artists and patrons, and a culture of civic pride and self-respect. So that's the vision statement. There was one thing we wanted to know was how how clear that was to people who maybe didn't know us that well, to see if we needed to say things a little bit differently. And what we learned is that we do need to work on that a little bit. So we're going to be modifying those. That's a work in progress right now. So we're going to make that as true to who we are and what we're doing as we possibly can.
Well, that sounds good, but once in a while I begin to wonder whether you really are focusing on symphony as opposed to all the words about new and diverse and experimental. And the thing that comes to mind is I guess it's rock and roll one that we tried right after being down at McCaw Hall, and I think cost us a lot in terms of making our mark, because so many people loved the McCaw Hall when we came down here and saw rock and roll. And so I think that if there's a way to, I like all your diversity and all that, but I think you might want to emphasize that this is all about symphony.
Absolutely. Oh, yeah, definitely. Yeah. Thank you for that, but we never lose sight of that. We really don't, so.
Councilmember Trout Manuel.
In fact, when we met, when they gave us these questions, they made us break out into 4 groups, and we all came back with different descriptions of the questions that they asked, and it was kind of difficult trying to come up with the right answers and everything. And after we finished, then they came up with what they were talking about. And it was completely different from what we
Exactly. That's why we did it.
That's why we did it.
So it was
Yeah.
very interesting,
Yes.
and I'm glad I was part of it, so thank you.
We're glad to.
Yeah, thank you very much. So.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you. So Resolution 5320 will be on the agenda next week.
Great.
Right. Thank you.
And it sounds like Bill's already planning for next year when you bring the results, so hey.
With all those dots and zeros.
Yes. Okay, let's move on to legislative agenda for 2018. Director Hinman.
Thank you. So, we wanted to, and you were given some late attachments today we provided the 2016 legislative agenda in error. That was my fault. And so Sean Campbell sent to you the 2017 legislative agenda that we worked off of last year. And you should have also received the Sound Cities Association on your table. Sean is saying they're on your table.
We need one.
No, maybe it's underneath here.
Oh, she's got it, yeah.
Thank you, thank you.
So as is our typical process in the fall, we like to start talking about what our legislative agenda will be for the state and federal level. And we thought we could start the conversation by looking back at the 2017 agenda a little bit. There's a bit of it I think we'll probably keep and maybe revise a little. Some things we had some wins on, making sure that we were coalescing our legislative priorities with other organizations like Association of Washington Cities, Sound Cities Association, National League of Cities, and all of those other advocacy organizations that we work with, and of course drill it down to the things that are top-level priorities for us here in Auburn. And as you all know, we are working on legislative things throughout the year, and there have been a few things that have cropped up that we have made sure to stay on top of and stay in contact with our delegations in Olympia and also in Washington, D.C. I think probably the biggest one right now that Shelley could speak to a little bit is the SALT funding and making sure that that is maintained at the federal level, and municipal bonds and those kinds of things that we've kept a close eye on, especially with the change of administration in D.C. In Olympia, of course, we are very concerned about making sure that they pass their capital budget so that we can get some projects online, and we have, of course, Director Snyder and Director Coleman keeping a close eye on that as well, because we've got some things that we need to do. But that being said, on the 2017 agenda that we worked from, at the state level, we had 4 priorities that we were working towards, and that would be affordable housing, stable infrastructure funding, the levy lid lift, and the public records codes as they exist currently. And I think our city clerks will be thrilled that we did get a bit of movement on the Public Records Act. And there were 2 things that were passed in the last session that were hopefully a step in the right direction of the legislation keeping up with the current technology and the state of public records as they are right now. And then on the federal side, we had, of course, as many cities did, looking at infrastructure funding, looking at funding for homelessness and mental health, and also the affordability of living and infrastructure funding. As you all know, as we've been studying through most of the year, that funding for our infrastructure at the federal level is of great importance to us here, and making sure that we can maintain those things that get those dollars back here is going to be very helpful. And then we can just open this up for discussion shortly, just to kind of explain the thought process of what we put in front of you, because Association of Washington Cities has released their 2018 priorities in the broad sense, the 4 priorities dealing with housing conditions, affordable housing, funds for mental health, chemical dependency, and social safety net programs, economic development initiatives, and state shared revenues are the things that, and so these are things that we will look at along with our consultants, like I said, in all other areas to align our priorities with.
Councilmember Pelosi.
I thought we would have a 2016 state priorities, AWC priorities, so we could compare.
The 2016.
2016.
I can send those to you.
I thought,
2016
2016.
or 2017?
You're talking for AWC?
Yeah. I know that they sent this out.
Right.
You all saw this.
Yep.
The recap of this year. And I was particularly looking for something on hazardous waste transport.
Okay.
You know, and because I know I worked on it, Claude worked on it in teleconferences we had.
Comment on that.
Oh, yes, Councilmember
During our
DeBoer.
last AWC board meeting, there were probably 20 different topics on the agenda for the board to review. And hazardous material transport was actually one of those items on the agenda. As we finish up the discussion, these 4 rose to the top. But the others are not forgotten. And the board will probably go back and also revisit some of those other issues. And Dave Williams from AWC is also looking into that as well, because everybody knows that's a priority issue as well. But it's a priority issue mainly on the national level, not much on the state level. So I think Dave's going to come back to us on the national level and say, we need to push our congressional delegation into this process a little further.
Well, maybe I'm confused a little bit. Maybe the hazardous waste transport was only in the federal.
Yeah.
It was discussed,
Not in this
no,
one.
but it was discussed in the last
Okay.
board meeting on the state level as well,
Okay. Oh, okay.
for awareness and involvement.
Yeah.
But again, in the state level, it didn't rise to the top of the priority list.
But see, you're on the state
I'm on the
legislative
AWC
committee.
board. I'm on the,
I'm on the
no,
state
yeah,
Oh,
legislative.
you're on it. Then I'm on the federal. Okay.
I'm still on the
Yeah.
federal committee as well.
Okay. Oh, yeah. All right.
And Councilmember Pelosi, do you have a timeline for when NLC will be releasing their priority list? I couldn't find a timeline from them as to what they were
You
doing.
know, I haven't seen one yet. because I do share with you guys what I get.
Yeah.
And, have not seen one.
Okay, so we'll keep our eye
I'll
out for
keep
it.
an eye out, and I'll sure shoot it out as soon as we get it.
Okay.
Councilmember Wagner.
Every year I bring up the post office, and I understand it's a complicated issue because U.S. Postal Service is not a federal agent, or maybe an agency, I don't know. Anyway, it's not a directly government agency. And we know that they're cutting costs, and if we push too hard, they may say, well, we're going to consolidate Auburn with Kent. And so it always gets tangled up in, is there a way to even lobby for a new post office for this city of 80,000 when that one's built for 20,000? What I would like to see is some work on our part about how we could incentivize the U.S. Postal Service to do this. For instance, part of the new land available at GSA, or if we're going to do more downtown, maybe we even find something there. But I think they need a lot more space than we'd be able to put downtown. But I think unless we do something about it, we're going to be in that little cramped closet for the next 20 years, and we have to do something about it. And I'm not giving you a suggestion to put it in the federal list, as much as I am asking that we work somehow with our lobbyists to understand what the path is to make this happen.
You know, because when I look at it over the last 20 years, I've seen the one in Ording, which is a very small town. It's the same size as this and beautiful. I've seen the Kent one remodeled. I've seen a beautiful one built out there at Covington. And the only thing that's really changed for us is a more cumbersome way to get through the parking lot, and new rocks and shrubs. Yeah, and I've heard you speak to this over the years, and we've all been kind of in agreement. Maybe that's something, Dana, you could help us with.
Yeah, we brought it up last year, and I think your idea has legs around, I don't know if incentivizing would, well, I think more around having more satellite buildings, or more accessibility to the actual postal service, because we did have a few in town. They didn't last very long because financially it just didn't quite work out, but we do know that there was a decent enough population that did appreciate having different areas of town where they could take care of their postal needs beyond, you know, FedEx and a UPS store, but an actual USPS kind of presence, which might be an easier
I think it has an
ask.
economic development aspect that's big time, because when you're in there waiting at the counter, there are all these people coming in with a bucket loads stuff to ship, and you know, it's some small business shipping out 20 items or 50 items. And since small businesses are where things grow, and we need to do more of that in this city, it's connected to the post office. And I'm wondering if there's a way to kind of call it communication rather than post office. Because, you know, we're doing stuff on the IT level with communication, but we're not doing stuff with that moving physical things around, other than, you know, buying them from FedEx or UPS. We need to make sure that we are supporting our small businesses on that side too.
How about Councilmember Pelosi?
I agree with you, Rich, and maybe this is an opportunity for the mayor to get Congressman Reichert, make this his legacy.
We could name it. We could name it after
The Dave Reichert
Before
Post
he
Office
leaves.
Building.
Yeah.
There we go.
Name it after him.
But no, seriously, maybe we could do something like that, Mayor.
So we have had conversations with our consultants, and they have ventured out, as I've mentioned, Rich, they have ventured out into some of those discussions back in Washington, D.C., and that's where we get the caution of not pushing too hard, because they are in a focus right now of consolidating, and the consolidation most likely would be to Federal Way, and we certainly don't want to
That's hard to
consolidate to
imagine,
Federal
yeah.
Way. So we will continue to push and keep it in everybody's mind. And I thank you for saying, you know, don't put it on here, because it sometimes might not serve us the best, but to continue to have our consultants work on it, and they have some very good connections back there, so.
And then to take a look a little bit at the Sound Cities Association, they've come out with 3 priorities that are going to be voted on next month, is that right?
November 8th.
Okay. And that is adjusting the property tax cap, investing in public health services, and addressing the housing and homelessness crisis. So, of course, housing and homelessness is bleeding across all areas, state, local, federal, and it's nice to see that kind of coalescing of ideas and how that's going to happen. We will anxiously await as well. So
I'm pleased to see the attention to public health, especially since we had experienced some cutbacks, which the mayor was able to fill, but public health leads into a lot of other things, a lot of homelessness, affordable housing, quality of life, healthy living, and everything else. And many of the missions that public health has been able to meet in the past, they've had to cut back as their funding has been cut back. So it would be nice to have a more viable or vigorous public health department.
yeah, and there's high anxiety around what's going to go on with Affordable Care Act and what's going to go on
Yeah.
at the federal level with that. And, you know, we're seeing and hearing it in a lot of populations. It's just they're not quite sure what's going to happen with their health care, and that might be their only fallback.
Council Member DeCoursey and then Council Member Holman.
On the affordable housing side, during the last legislative session, we had hoped we would have a $200 million investment in the housing trust fund, and the governor's budget, I believe, reduced it down to like $116 million. I'm not even sure where it actually wound up. I think probably below that, but it's still important to push for the $200 million and to keep that at that level. To me, that's just a starting point level. That's not an ending point level. And also, as directed by the members of the Affordable Housing Advisory Board, the Department of Commerce has just let a contract to a consultant organization who's going to do an updated study, what has been done quite a few years, an updated study on buildable lands, and also taking a look at the question that we've asked numerous times and we've even talked about here, is the potential use of government-owned land for affordable housing.
Yeah.
So that study is going to take probably 1 year before we'll see any results of that, but it's underway this coming month, just to let you know.
Council Member Holman.
We are all involved in various capacities in advocating for these things. Bill on the national level with NLC, Claude with Association of Washington Cities, myself as an alternate on a regional Sound Cities basis, but none of us can speak beyond themselves unless we as a council give permission to say that these are our advocacy positions so that we can speak for all of us. It's one thing for me to speak, say, well, this is what I feel. Well, how does your council feel? Well, I can't speak for you. So if at next week's council session, we could vote to accept these positions on both federal, state, and regional, then we could go forward at our next meetings and say, this is how the City of Auburn City Council feels. So I would respectfully ask us to consider voting on it as a council next week.
So,
Council Member Pelosi.
so would that take a resolution or what?
I think so. Dan?
Would be November 6th.
That would be one way to do it. It doesn't have to be the only way. A motion properly made and seconded would be something that would show up in your minutes, but a resolution would be easy to put together.
Because sometimes, still speaking here, sometimes the minutes don't reflect the total detail that one would like to see unless it was requested.
Well, if it was showed in the minutes, it'd keep us out of the grease, and that's all I'm asking.
Yeah,
is
but
that
we-
we have the authority to achieve some sort of consensus.
If it's your pleasure, though, we could have a resolution for you.
Whichever is best in your opinion.
Councilmember DeCoursey.
I think a resolution has more impact overall, as
Yes,
Councilman
it
was
does.
talking. And if somebody asks us, we just basically tell our state legislators, or even our federal legislators, hey, we have a resolution on this.
Or
and this
county
is-
council,
County council,
or
or anybody. Yeah,
Senator
Friday,
so-and-so.
yeah, or even we go back to our boards or our committees, and Auburn has a resolution on this issue of where we firmly believe this is the direction we should take, so. Yeah.
Well, Councilmember Wagner.
The Puget Sound Gateway project funding, where it sounds like the state's going to try to draw all of the local funds from BSRC and elsewhere as a share of the Puget Sound Gateway. Where does that show up then in our couple of pages of the fine print that I don't think we're going to be able to all get behind?
I'll
I'd like to
defer to
see
Kevin
something.
on that one.
From Community Development Public Works, at the bottom of our sheet, there is actually a paragraph on that, council member, regarding the Puget Sound Gateway project funding. We see it as a regional issue that more than just Auburn need to come together on because of the $130 million ask that the legislature has identified for local governments to support that. So that is, if you take a look at that sheet that says recommendations, it's just a one-page sheet, recommendations for 2018 legislative agenda items at the bottom of that page. That's our
Well, I saw
department's
that,
funds.
and I wondered why didn't it show up in the fine print one?
Well, I think it's
That's
open for
last
discussion.
year's, Rich.
Well, that's last year's.
It's 2017.
Oh, yeah, okay. Sorry.
Okay.
So, I guess I'm a little leery of a resolution that comes out in support of everything without us sitting down and looking at what it's going to cost our citizens and what it's going to actually give our citizens in Auburn. In the past, we've done some unilateral kind of supportive things so that the people would have a chance to vote and hear their voice, and it's come back to burn us. I was looking for the Sound Cities 2018 legislative agenda. And as an example to what I'm trying to share with you, I've only got the 2017 legislative agenda, and the first item there is to adjust the property tax cap. I'd have to sit down with Shelley and have her explain to me the pluses and minuses of that for the citizens in Auburn before I would support something along that line. And I think we need to go through each one of them and look at the pluses and minuses based on the verbiage that's provided us and not be, and really look at it line by line.
You have the 2018 as well.
Okay, thank you.
It's in your packet.
So what I'm proposing is, I don't have a problem if we debate or discuss among each other, but I want to go through them one by one, say, what's this going to cost our citizens? What are we going to get for it? What are some of the trade-offs? And are we truly going to get that? So that when we say we're supporting this, our eyes are wide open.
Are you talking about different priorities on this handout?
Mhm. So maybe we could, I know that time is of the essence, maybe we could do that at the next study session in November. Or we can have a resolution vote if that's your preference, or we can do both.
I'm just consulting my calendar.
Okay.
It would be after the SCA vote, after the PIC vote.
So it's not timely. Special meeting.
Oh, Mayor Backus,
That
please.
would be there, yes. The 1% property tax cap is not necessarily doing anything to the citizens of Auburn. It is simply allowing local jurisdictions to come away from that cap. It doesn't mean that the city of Auburn would do anything with it. It's just giving local jurisdictions that option.
Councilmember Holman.
As far as Sound Cities Association's legislative agenda, it is identical to the 2017 legislative agenda that they passed and that we agreed to pass last year, unanimously passed. So it hasn't changed other than they've cleaned up the language and they've put it in a one-page bullet format to make it easier when we sit down with our county councilmen or state legislators, legislators, to give them the 1-minute elevator speech. So it's the same agenda, just refreshed to make it briefer and more to the point. That's the only change between 17 and 18. And as far as the 1% annual property cap, I really do encourage you to sit down with our Director of Finance and see where that ties our hands, not for lodging more taxes against citizens, but for allowing us to spend the money that we could achieve through to meet inflationary needs. So it caps us, it doesn't cap our ability to tax.
Okay, well, there will be a few more pieces of information that will come in over time. We usually get things from the police department through WASPIC and other things where public safety initiatives are high on the priority list. And Chief, do you know off the top of your head when the WASPIC priorities might?
I'm not aware, I think they should be meeting shortly, but
Okay.
They usually do it at the fall conference, which is in November.
Okay.
Land.
Okay.
So, Dana, back on the investment in public health services and the $7 million shortfall, where would they propose that if this were passed, this $7 million would come from?
Through SCA, I'm not sure, the mayor, or I think, John, you were at the meeting. Did they indicate any more specifics on that?
Well, no, not at the meeting, but it would come from the county.
And where would the county get it? Would it do it within its existing budget, or is it going to look for more taxing
I
authority?
can't speak for the county's budget.
Okay. Okay. And those are the kinds of questions that I have. Because, I mean, in theory, I support all of these things, but how they're later implemented and how our consent is construed to the population out there gets us in hot water. And so, those are my concerns. Councilmember Wagner.
If I go back to the John Gateway project funding again, I personally think that Auburn is negatively affected by that big time because we use those two, 167 and 118 as part of our street system. We now use it a lot for commuting, and we're going to have a whole lot more semi-trucks on there when it opens up down to the port. And I've addressed or talked to senior management at OSDOT several times saying, when are you going to plan for all those extra trucks on everything that exists on 167? They say, well, we'll get around to it. And so, you know, I think we ought to have something that's specific to us about 167. And maybe our traffic engineers can confirm for me whether or not we really do use it as part of the city system. I do, I know. To get from Main Street to 15th Northwest, I often go out on 167. So I'd like to see us get more specific rather than just having a regional view that this is a bad idea for them to take over PSRC funds.
And that's one thing we're always encouraged to do with our consultants when we kind of create these narratives around why this is important. So anytime we can really draw a local picture as to, yes, this is a large regional issue and a large regional funding structure that's very important to us, and it's important to us because of this, and we can demonstrate specifically how it affects us, either good or bad.
Councilmember Holman.
Could I ask our Director of Finance, Shelley, to weigh in on the 1% property cap? 1% is an arbitrary figure, but you could explain a lot better about how inflation and just the size of Auburn growing is affecting us to not be able to, and to be limited by the 1% cap. And I'm explaining it poorly, but.
Well, approximately 1/3 of the general fund revenues are property tax. And sales tax is a little bit less than that, and then other revenues. If property tax is growing at 1% and our labor contracts are growing at a greater rate, which they are, they're growing at 2 or 3% a year in this labor market, it's getting more difficult, that it will catch up to us, given that, you know, our labor and our medical for our employees is increasing at a greater rate. And if sales tax in the past has come in sometimes and had a pretty healthy growth rate to make up for that, but right now general fund sales tax is like flat. And so every 1% increase is about $200,000. It's not, you know, it sounds like a lot of money, but when we have a payroll and benefit that runs at about 60% of our general fund budget, it's a big deal. And 200,000 doesn't cover it.
So in other words, what you're saying is that our ability to being capped at 1% doesn't allow us to keep up with inflation, nor the size of our population growing.
Correct.
And so what we're proposing is that the cap still be limited, but instead of an arbitrary 1%, be tied to inflation and the size of population growth.
That would be good, or wage growth.
See, whose wage growth? Our community's wage growth or the wage growth of our employees?
I would say even the community wage growth,
Okay.
that would be higher than 1%.
I think that that's something that we should look at, but because I feel out there that in the community, a lot of people's wages are not growing, and they can't keep up with some of the new tax burdens, and this might be an inappropriate time to be looking at raising the cap.
It doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to raise the cap.
No, I know, but there's slippery slope.
There's also
Councilmember
reason-
Wagner.
Well, it's still our choice of whether we use that extra amount. And, you know, not every citizen will realize that, say it's higher taxes. But I'm in favor of being more tied to realistic changes, as John proposes.
And we did vote for it last year.
Would it hurt, oops.
Go ahead.
Would it hurt for us to hold off and get more information on this, another study session?
From my perspective, but there's not a rush. I mean, there's certainly more information gathering we can do.
I'd like to see that too.
Bill after November 4th.
Councilmember DeCoursey, do you have any thoughts?
I'm just thinking that what Councilmember Holman mentioned in his initial statement, that instead of us going and talking to our legislators individually, we go and talk
Yeah.
with the voice of the council. Now, that doesn't mean that we're going to go in and promote 100% every single item on here. If we feel as a council we need to take some other measures or other actions, I think it gives us that opportunity to have open dialogue with our legislators on all levels as a unified group. So if we're going down to Olympia, next January, and 3 of us are sitting in one of the senator's offices, the 3 of us are saying, by the way, our city council, we're gonna have to say, it's our city council. And by the way, on your 1% property, on the cap, Mr. Senator, or Ms. Senator, tell us what's going to happen when the state pushes this through, and what does it mean to the citizens, and what is the flexibility the cities can have? You know, are you going to allow us to raise the cap based on inflation, or what's the legislative decision going to be on this? Just to get opinions. This is for conversation purposes. And I think our resolution, in some respects, needs to provide us with the flexibility of allowing us to have continued dialogue, not final decision-making, because these are all open-ended, and this is mainly a dialogue process.
And
Councilmember Holman.
yeah, there is no urgency in this matter, other than there will be a vote taken at SCA on November 8th. So if we are going to debate it, perhaps we should debate it tonight or at the council session where the resolution is presented.
Councilmember Pelosi.
What, we could have a special study session on the 6th, say at 5 o'clock. We have or earlier, you know, but we could do it.
Absolutely.
And I think we should do it, so that we're prepared for the SCA pick on the 8th.
I think that's a wise choice. Bring a seat cushion. It's going to be a long night.
Well, yeah, but, you know, I know that when I attended the pick, many of the cities around the table said, sorry, I can't vote on that because I haven't reviewed this with the city council. So it's important we do that.
Specifically so that we don't end up being a debating society, let's restrict it to the legislative agenda for the Sound Cities Association. One item only. The other, we have a little more flexibility. On this one, let's dig down on SCAs so that whether it's Nancy speaking or for the city or myself or any other alternate that comes and speaks, we speak as a unified body. Much more powerful.
So if you don't have a problem with that concept, let's look at our calendars now. It makes everyone's job a little bit easier if we can, when we're all sitting in the room, calendars.
That's the same day.
Well, my feeling is if we don't do it on the 6th, we need to do it this week sometime.
I'm wide open.
6th is good for me.
Me too.
Okay, Mayor Gaddis?
So there is a TAMA delegation farewell, Dana, from 5:30 to 6:30. Is that a council function?
I did, yeah.
But I also have the junior council at that same time, so maybe we could,
How
are
about
you
4
not available?
o'clock? How about 4 o'clock?
Or 3.
Or 3?
Yolanda, what is your,
Three would work for me.
Rich? Bob?
Looks good to me.
Okay. John?
3?
Claude? Nancy? Okay,
3.
okay.
3 p.m.?
3 o'clock.
And
One
only
item.
on the SCA legislative agenda
Yes,
items.
yes.
SCA.
And just to clarify, you would like some information from Shelley regarding the property tax cap and Would you like us to ferret out some information from the county on the public health issue?
Yes, and
Okay.
I want to know what the impact would be on an average homeowners in relationship to the new school levy impact that, you know, for the 7 or 6 new schools and 6 remodeled and 2 new ones. I'd like, in relation to that, the impact of ST3 so that we can look at the total tax burden. Thank you.
So, question.
Councilmember Pelosi.
So, John, with this SCA packet we received tonight,
Yes, sir.
you've got item 7, legislative, so which, and then there's another legislative agenda.
That's 17.
Yeah, that's last year's, just as a comparison to show you that they really haven't changed. It's just gotten briefer.
Okay, so we're only looking at pages 21 through 24.
26 is your draft 2018 agenda.
Mine only goes to 24. Well,
The new one or the old one?
oh, I see.
Yeah, the last
And then
page.
picks up on 26, okay.
25 and 26 are 2017 for just for
No, forget it. Yeah,
comparison.
yeah, comparison.
So
Okay. got it.
important for historical reference, but not what we're potentially voting for.
Okay. Any other thoughts before we move on? Thank you, Dana. Thanks. Now we're going to move on to item C, frequency of special focus area meetings. I think this was one, Bill, you were interested in.
I spoke on it. Do you want me to speak on it again? Well, I think the mayor had some thoughts too.
Well, so this was actually after Councilmember Pelosi's comment of not having, frequency not being often enough to be able to get special focus area topics under special focus area instead of the general portion of a study session. I sent an email to a few council members just to get a sense of whether you would be interested in doubling up on special focus areas during each study session, limiting the number of topics, though. You can't have the same number of topics as you do currently. You would have to spread them out, but again, you would have greater frequency to be able to address those issues. And so doubling up to where there would be 2 special focus areas at each study session. Of course, the chairs of each would need to work in conjunction with each other to ensure that we weren't going too long. And it wouldn't be the same, well, I guess it could be the same 2 every time, since there are only 4. And maybe put one on there that typically has more agenda items, along with the one that doesn't typically have as many agenda items, and be able to have more discussion on a more frequent basis for you.
Well, it seems to me that no matter how many items we have, we go a long time. So if we double up topics, I still think we're going to go, and we have the latitude now to add them out of sequence.
It wasn't that you wouldn't go any longer, it was that you had the opportunity for the chairs who have said they wanted more opportunity to be the chairs, and to have those leadership opportunities to actually have them and be able to have those items under their special focus area, as opposed to just adding them all to the general session for the deputy mayor to chair.
Like, as an example, traffic calming. that's been hanging around for quite a while. And because of the way we're currently scheduled, it delays any discussion or any action. And that was my only thrust at the last meeting, was that many of these things are just sitting there on a treadmill, you know? And we're not getting it out on the table so we can take some action, staff take action, bam, happy citizen, you know?
Well, with traffic calming, Director Snyder specifically asked that we move it into February when we're through some of these capital projects and they have some time to share with us. Ingrid has some information on turtles and bumps and those types of things, and they need some time to come up with a presentation. But there may be other ones that have been pushed aside as we try to work with the ones that we see as more of a priority. Councilmember DeCoursey.
I don't have an issue with if we double up and have the special focus areas being able to present more frequently. What I would suggest is that the chair and the vice chair, when they're meeting with staff, is we truly do prioritize the issues. Because if we just have a list of items to talk about, we might as well just say, close the doors at midnight, even though we're going to be too late to close the doors at midnight.
Yeah.
But, I think we should make sure that, again, we, in our responsibilities, set the priorities along with staff.
So what's the, Deputy Mayor, what's the next steps then if we wanted to start doubling this up? Change the schedule?
Well, let's, some of them I feel, and I'm just brainstorming, throwing this out, that we don't need to double up on, like finance. It's pretty predictable. We know when those quarterlies are. If you look at this list and you look at the red one, capital projects and all of that, those are pretty important things to our citizens who are wanting to know what's going on this road, what are your thoughts long range on this area. That one might be one, public works and community development, that we want to double up with something else. And I think the green one, human service, health and human services, is a little bit like finance. It's a little bit more, less dynamic and more we can plan around. That we ought to look at maybe doubling up public works and community development. That was just an idea. Yes, Councilmember DeCoursey.
To double up on all four of them, two at a time. Let's say, for example, Councilmember Baggett, as chair of the Finance and Economic Development, it's his time every other time. They say, we only have 2 items on our agenda to discuss this time, or we have 1 item on the agenda. And maybe the next time he has 4 items on the agenda. But I think we allow ourselves the flexibility of doing that. And again, I think that's where the chairs and the vice chairs come in, of setting the agenda with staff and knowing how, why, and when you're going to present something.
Councilmember Baggett.
Kind of taking off on that thought, some of these things also can be quite lengthy.
Like finance can.
Like finance.
Yes.
And that's only because of the details involved in the processes. The capital projects is another one that's extensive. So we need to take that into consideration before we start doubling up on all of these issues. Some of them you just may want to do 1 or 2 at a time.
But see, that might be the problem, Bob. The priority on some of those may want to get acted right away.
Yes.
Discussed right away. And that's where the priorities come in.
Councilmember Wagner.
I think we have to remember that we can always put something into the general thing. And
Yeah.
I'm planning to do that tonight on the roundabout up on High Street, even though it doesn't show up here because it just came up today. We have that thing called other discussion items or new business, either one of those, I can bring up the roundabout. And I think that's your out, be able to get something up that you want to right away, rather than having everybody have it every 2 weeks.
Councilmember Holman.
I would just implore you, if you're going to bring it up under other discussion or new business, try and give us some advance warning so that we have the material to digest and the time to do the research. You've seen how detailed our colleague, Mr. Pelosa, goes into details. That didn't happen sitting here at this table. It happened over several hours of reading and note-taking. So it's incumbent on the chairs and vice chairs to do the homework, put it in ahead of time so that we have a little bit of advance notice that it's coming.
I think that sometimes that does work, but sometimes it doesn't. It's really important for our clientele that send something to us, for us to be able to say that we're going to publicly bring it up, and then we set a date to discuss it, and they don't feel like it's, lost too. Mayor Backus.
Yeah, just a reminder what I said earlier, and as a reminder of what you all discussed when we changed this, the goal was that each of you wanted to have more leadership opportunities. And so putting everything into a general topic does not provide you the leadership opportunities that you were asking for and that you said you desperately wanted. So having the opportunity, well, rolling your eyes isn't going to help, but having that opportunity that you discussed for quite a while, it gives you more flexibility to do that if you double up on these special focus areas.
Again, this is our group, and we get to orchestrate it the way we want to, that meets our needs. Why don't we put this on the next in 2 more weeks, and we talk about it, and it gives us a chance to think about some other solutions. But I heard some great ideas, and one of the ideas that I heard was that the chairs work with the department people to make sure that this really is what we need to be talking about, and that we, like John always reminds us, we're not in the weeds. Though sometimes the weeds are important, but that we really are getting a list that represents where we need to be headed. And let's continue to look, because you made a good point too, Bob, that even though it's not very often when you do it, it usually takes 2 hours, because we are dealing with all of the finances of the city, not unlike when we hear about the capital projects update, which is a quarterly report too. So let's, yes, Councilmember.
Finish, please.
Okay, so I'll put it on the agenda for our next study session, and this time we're going to come in set with ideas of how we might make this work better for us. Councilmember Holman.
Speaking to leadership opportunities for our committee chairs, when a motion needs to be made by one of the special focus areas, a resolution or an ordinance, might I suggest one of the difficulties that you and I both had when we started making motions and resolutions was then summarizing, and part of the growth experience of learning is making that motion and trying to speak clearly to the motion. May I suggest that if it is a resolution or an ordinance from a special focus area, that they make the resolution and they defend the resolution?
I think that that's a good suggestion, and I know that Pelosa has occasionally done that and taken the time to kind of write it down so that it is based on his understanding and what he's trying to express, and it makes it easier for our attorney too. Councilmember DeCoursey.
I'd ask for one more favor, I guess you might say, in this. So since the next 2 focus areas are Health and Human Services on November 13th, Finance and Economic Development on November 27th, that we have those 2 chairs meet together and just kind of review their agenda, so we come back at our next study session to get a better idea of how you 2 feel about the process of doubling up. Although those up may not be the two that double up together, but, you know, to give us an opportunity to kind of say, okay, if we did this, here's a direction we think we can go in our special focus areas. And it may help us kind of decide some of the timeline issues as well.
Good suggestion.
I feel that that's a great suggestion. And meanwhile, we're going to have to meet with the directors and talk to them about what are the speakers and the individuals that they're going to invite, so that way we're prepared as well.
Councilmember Pelosi.
Excuse me, I have another thought. It's different than what we've just talked about. And I had thought about this before to move things along, and that is take the red as an example. Pulling an item out of there, talk to the chair and say, hey, I want to pull this item. I recommend pulling this item out because blah, 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 blah. And move it up to another focus group. And you could speak from up here. You could have two people up here.
Yeah.
I mean, that was my whole thrust, is getting things moving.
Let's start with the two people talking and see what they can work out, and go from there. Okay? And we'll put this on the agenda for next study session to continue to look at ways of making sure we have a balanced approach to our special focus areas. Okay. Now let's go on to item D, developmental incentives. When we put this on the agenda, or talked about it a meeting ago, we just wanted to be able to come up with some ideas that we could give to Kevin as to things that we might like to have him research. And so he's prepared with us a document that gives us some boundaries, and I greatly appreciate it. Kevin, you want to come up here and join us? Want to just give us a quick overview?
Sure.
Thank you very much.
So, disclaimer, this memorandum was put together by me. It represents my thoughts only, and as I said in the memo at the beginning paragraph, I do not speak for city administration or other departments and department directors. But what I was hoping to do is to assist council in this conversation by giving you some, as the deputy mayor referred to, some parameters. First and foremost being the state constitutional limit, which I think most of you are familiar with, the gift of public funds issue. And this really is just to remind you of what our state constitution tells us we can and cannot do in the vein of development incentives. We are not like other states. Some of you may have heard about the recent Amazon endeavor. For example, New Jersey put together a $7 billion package. Washington State in general, and the local governments and state and other governments that exist within that sphere do not have that kind of latitude. So that's just the first element of giving you that context. Second part of it is, is if you go on to page 2 of 4 of the memo, considerations for economic development incentives. This is something that we referred to a few weeks ago when we were talking to you about the environmental park to light industrial area-wide rezone. And we just, in that conversation and the concept of incentives, we reminded you of some things that staff felt were important when you're thinking about development incentives. First, they must account for market forces. You've heard me say that multiple times, and you'll see that I kind of in caps really emphasize this, because we must understand those market forces and need to know how the incentives will be used and what the value back to the community is. We must be rooted in reality. We must understand and be realistic about what the city will gain and or lose in applying incentives. There's usually both in that vein. And then under state law, incentives are typically limited to service. For example, expedited services delivery, policy, flexible development standards, and then financial reduction of fees or city pays fees. And these are things that this council and previous councils has talked about. The next section of the memo really kind of talks about what we've done in the past to incentivize, both in the programmatic area as well as in the financial area. We also have worked really hard to update our development regulations, working with yourselves, with the Planning Commission, with the interested members of the community. And we also have, my feeling very strongly is that we have worked really hard for all those that are involved in the development review process. We are responsive, we are problem-solving oriented. Now, I say it in the memo and I'll say it right here, sometimes we do have to say no. And we really focus on delivering that message in the most thoughtful and considerate way that we can. We try to look for all the creative problem-solving opportunities, but sometimes the answer is no. And that's because we also have an equal responsibility to uphold the codes and regulations that you and previous councils have adopted. So we're constantly doing this balancing act, but we've gotten the message loud and clear from the mayor, from yourselves as council members of what your expectations are for service delivery, and we take that really seriously. As most of you, I think, also know, our department is engaged in a lean process. We are working through our development processes to lean them out, if you will, make them more efficient. And we're also building that into our corporate culture as a department. And then the next element of the memo really does talk about, this was an excerpt from an article that I had looked at by Tracy Burrows, who was the Executive Director of Municipal Research and Services Center, MRSC. And there was just two kind of excerpts from that article that I thought were really helpful in terms of framing any conversation you might have. One was just a direct kind of point about flexibility and being strategic, and the other was kind of showing an example of how Kirkland addressed a concern. Finally, I ended it with just giving you my thoughts. Again, these are my thoughts only. And really what it comes down to is being very tactical in utilization of development incentives and being strategic. And honestly, and I'm being very honest about my own personal opinion, I'm not a huge fan of development incentives because I think that what really incentivizes businesses to come, stay, expand, and prosper is a quality community with quality streets, quality roads, all those elements I list in there. And that I'm not saying you don't want to use development incentives, but I really think you need to be tactical about that because really great communities, and we have some examples in our region and throughout the United States, they don't need to extend incentives because people want to be there, because they're great communities to locate a business in, for their employees to live in, and for folks to visit and recreate. And so focusing on becoming a really great community with all those attributes that really make people stand up and take notice, I think to me is really where a lot of the effort needs to go. And you can focus around the regulatory relief or regulatory environment element to make that happen. And that's where I think to get the biggest bang for your buck. So that's kind of summarizing.
Say that last sentence one more time.
The
best bang for your buck was?
Best bang for your buck.
Yeah.
Just kind of coalescing energy and activity around regulatory relief, looking at how our development regulations and policies are, and putting that together to build that great community. And I think that's where you get the biggest bang for your buck.
Councilmember Holman.
I'm glad you said that. In fact, that's paramount to the point that I'm going to try and have a conversation with my colleagues on. Economic development can mean giving tax relief to some extent, but that comes right out of our general fund monies. We get it usually made up within the first couple years because of the increased economic vitality, but there are other types of economic development. And Rich, I think this is what you were referring to in our conversation last week. A lot of the incentives that you were referring to were non-financial in nature. And which brings up a real life example, if I may. We have a chapter 12.64 alpha.020 section B, and it shall be a condition of any building, grading, or special permit one or more of the following criteria, and I'll just speak to one criteria only. Commercial development with an estimated value of the proposed structure exceeding 25% of the assessed value of the existing structure will trigger all these different requirements. Specifically, y'all are familiar with the shopping center, the SAR grocery store out on Auburn Way North, has that huge parking lot that's never full. And a developer has come in and proposed taking a corner, an unused corner of that, and building a Sonic hamburger joint there. You know Sonic from the TV commercial? That's how you Sonic. They want to build there. But 25% of the assessed value of a parking lot, he can't put up anything more than a tent there without exceeding the 25%. And what that has triggered is, since he's just leasing this little corner of this land, it triggers him having to go out and make the sidewalks 10 feet wide instead of their existing 7 feet wide, not only in front of his little Sonic drive-in, but around the whole city block structure, 10-foot wide sidewalk. It requires him to underground the overhead power lines. Well, those are huge power line complexes. At any rate, his development fees for putting in a drive-in there and a little coffee shop, by his estimation, are going to be over $1.25 million. So if we want to grant this guy some sort of economic development incentive, it's not paying him, waiving certain development fees. Perhaps it's changing the language of what triggers him having to rebuild the infrastructure around. Now, the intent of this is excellent. We want wider sidewalks. But I might point out that the city of Auburn is rebuilding sidewalks right now on that same Auburn Way North, down by the Starbucks.
They aren't 10 feet wide.
They're rebuilding them as 10 feet wide. They're rebuilding them as exists at 7 feet wide. May I suggest that a 7-foot wide, this is where we can look at our own language that we've, not necessarily we, but our colleagues voted on at some point in time and said, this is good. The intentions are good here. And I applaud the intentions. But the effect of it is to chase away potential business that we never could make up financially as an incentive. So I hope that generates a certain amount of discussion as we go through and look at our ordinances.
I think that that was a great clarification statement that John made. And we talked about some of the regulations that we have on the books, and we've modified some of them for our large developers. And I think that we're ready to start looking at some of the other requirements that we have, because I've heard stories, we've all heard stories, and we also realize, Kevin, that when a story is told to us, it's not necessarily from the city's point of view, it's from, but we do need to look at this 25% thing, and maybe it needs to be something different. And so how do we begin the quest of making us look, small business-wise, a little bit more accessible?
Well, I think a couple of things. In fact, first, I just want to say something. I appreciate Councilmember Holman's example, because I think it was a really good example of the regulation that was put into effect with good intent. It's entirely appropriate.
Put in effect by this council.
Yes, by City Council. And it's entirely appropriate. In fact, I would argue that it's one of the council's main job is to revisit policy as you go through days, years of being a city, because things change. But, and I say that in my memo, and I want to highlight what Councilmember Holman said, is that here's an issue where we're hearing concerns, but we have to value that against other decision-making criteria. This council and previous councils have adopted a comprehensive plan. We have set certain expectations for development. Now, that may mean that you want to look at that differently, but as I say in the memo, be thoughtful make sure that you're looking at the broader picture. Make sure that you're comfortable with the outcome of making that change, because it has ramifications just beyond today. It might not have impact for 10 years. So those are the kind of things, as we go through that conversation with you, we would want to make sure that we were sharing with you our perspective. To answer your question directly, Deputy Mayor, I think you've already started to do that. We brought to you a little bit earlier in the year kind of a priorities list, hit list, if you will, of issues that were pretty common concerns that we were hearing at the staff level. And we went through those with you, and then we took them to Planning Commission. You've made some updates. I think we need to do that. If the council is interested in focusing on a particular class of business, say small business, and we'd have to define what that is, then we can certainly do that. But I think our regulations aren't really written to focus on one business type as an example. They're really written to apply across the board. So I think we could, if you as a council have areas of concern that you've heard in your conversations with community member, with either residences or businesses or others, I think sharing them with us would be very helpful. I think the conversation you just had about prioritization, we have to do the same thing. Not everything can be priority number one in this list that we might put together. And we'd want to prioritize those with you because it is a workload impact. And we want to be able to go through this in a thoughtful manner. And some of them obviously may need to go to Planning Commission depending on what the topic is. But I think we've started down that path. I think we have an opportunity to use the forums you've already created to do that. Your study session model is a great opportunity to do that if you want to take an opportunity to brainstorm, for example, and then we can come back and work with you to prioritize that.
Councilmember Wagner.
Evan, you and I just aren't on the same page. You say across the board and market forces. Well, yeah, everybody wants to build a warehouse, and not very many people want to build a high-tech biotech lab. And so that's a market, a very small one, but it was one that council focused on with making special development regulations for the EP zone. Mm-hmm. And you keep talking about the big market forces even capitalizing this time. I mean, that's totally not what I'm thinking. I'm thinking that we have specific, unique things about this city, like the environmental park, that we should leverage with specialty zones. The medical community, we've talked about some kind of an overlay there for making it easier for high-tech or medical businesses to come in. Again, high-paid jobs, not warehouse jobs at $15 an hour, but high-paid jobs at $200 grand a year. So, we're not on the same page. I'm disappointed.
With all due respect, Councilmember, I think we are. I think you're misinterpreting what I say. What I'm talking about is just having general awareness. I think that I'm not advocating for a certain type of business, warehouses or anything like that, but I think being cognizant and understanding what those market forces are, the worst thing to do, this is just my opinion again, I'm only sharing my opinions, the worst thing to do is plan for something that you don't really understand. And so all I'm saying is as we go forward to those conversations, whether it be focusing on an environmental park or focusing on some area of the city, is that we have awareness. Doesn't mean we have to go out and do a comprehensive study, but talking to the real estate market, talking to folks in the industry, understanding their needs. That's what I mean when I say market forces. So I'm not advocating for anything beyond just the things that I think that you as council members would want to know, that I as a professional staff person would want to know, which is if we're going to put incentives or policies into place, I would hate for the first response from the users of that to say, well, this doesn't reflect what we expected or we wanted. So that's all I'm saying. So I don't want to get out of alignment with you because I think we're actually saying the same thing. I don't
think we are. When you say development standards are supposed to comply across the board, that's totally at odds with the creation of the EP zone with different kinds of, not across the board, but narrowly focused development standards. And that's where we're on the same page.
Well, and that's the first statement. And I apologize. That was not my point was to say that a lot of times, if council has an interest, a lot of our I meant to say, and I apologize, what I was saying is our codes are written, I think, much more broadly. And so your point about narrowing them down to an EP or wherever, I guess we've kind of done that in the downtown area, so I have to retract what I said.
Exactly.
That's a fair point. But I would say outside of these special circumstances, most of our codes are written at a broadly applied level.
Most of it's going to be, but we have to take what we can leverage. Yeah. And the EP zone is one, and the medical community is another.
Sure.
We've probably got a dozen of those kind of special areas in town that we ought to take some look at development standards, which is not put money out of our pocket. It's just doing sensible things like the thing that Councilman.
And I think that's where we are in alignment. Is the regulatory.
I think you are trying to do that, but I think we need to, hear you say different things than across the board, and capitalizing market forces. I mean, come on, let's get the whole picture here, not just.
Yeah.
appealing to everybody and the highest use as opposed to the best use. I'm gonna come back to that over and over.
Yeah.
You know, that's zoning. It's highest and best, and I think you're getting them mixed up.
It's agreed, but that's okay.
Kevin, what I'm interested in as I travel, what I hear are about existing businesses that want to remodel or expand, mitigation fees and parking expectations. So I would like to have us look at sidewalk expectations, parking expectations, and when you remodel a building, an existing building, if you are going to exceed a certain percentage, what ends up, how does it impact mitigation fees? Councilmember Wagner.
Well, floor area ratio is the thing that's really worked downtown. And we've got to get that big time and see where we can personalize it to certain things like the EP zone. Or whatever zone we're going to try to make special in leverage or space.
I agree very strongly with that.
Yep. Any other ideas so we can just start this a little bit? Councilmember Pelosi.
Okay, I'd like to refer you to page 3. The middle paragraph where it begins, there will be instances. Go down to the 5th line. Asked of them if it is in direct conflict with the city's standards and regulations. And I am acutely aware of going to a counter, showing a person what I need. They open up a book, and they go down it, evaluate it. And all of a sudden, they say, no, we can't do that because of, there's a conflict with our city standards and regulations. At that point, does the city evaluate, can a change be made to successfully take care of this client?
I think it depends on the issue, Councilmember. I think in some instances, you've probably heard myself and Jeff Tate and others refer to the gray. Sometimes there's gray in the code. If there's gray in the code, I think there's more comfort by staff, not only at my level but other levels, to interpret hopefully beneficially for the client. There are instances where the code is written pretty black and white for us, and the 25% is a perfect example that Councilmember Holman used. There is no flexibility in that language for us to interpret that. So as it's written today.
Because of state statute?
No, it's because of the way the code was written. We the city, wrote it in a very...
Well, then let's change it.
Right, and so...
That's where I'm coming to.
Right. Yeah.
That's, can a change be made?
Yes.
Yes.
Well, let me back up. If a council decides to change.
Yeah. So here's my point I'm trying to make.
Yeah.
If staff comes to a no, ultimate no, then I'd like the opportunity, I think we all would like the opportunity to weigh in on that.
Well, and, sorry.
I would like to, I don't want to weigh in on all of those. I would like to create some room where an administrator that is skilled as you and Ingrid and Randy and the rest can make some, that have some movement to make some discretionary judgments. But with the volume that you handle in a week, we would have a part-time job.
And to Councilmember Pelosi's point, I think there are instances, and this is, we do hear concerns about this 25% is a good example. So we oftentimes are self-identifying, if you will, things that we think that potentially deserve a policy conversation. Sometimes it takes a little bit more time to bring them to bear because we have to have some internal discussions about the impacts that I'd be able to present to you. But this is a good example. But if we have flexibility to apply something that's in another arena of our code, and the code's written in such a way that we have that administrative flexibility, more often than not we are applying it because, again, we've heard the message loud and clear from City Administration, City Council is that you expect a high level of customer service. And we do a lot of problem solving.
Yeah, if you'll recall earlier this year, Jeff Tate has started to bring some of those. There's like a top 10 report that I asked him to prepare and he and Kevin, based on what do you see as the biggest obstacles and barriers in some of the approvals. And it's because they are very prescriptive, and that's the way council, they have been adopted in the past. And so there is a list of those that have the biggest obstacles or are the most frequent obstacles, and those are being brought forward as time permits for council to consider to provide additional flexibility for either the city engineer or the director of CDPW and other opportunities so that it's not so prescriptive.
So Kevin, I think that we've made it clear, or we've tried to make it clear in the past, that we do feel comfortable when we allow you to make administrative judgments. And we would like to ease up or look at the codes or regulations that we established whenever we did, and see the troubled spots that the ones I know are parking and when the mitigations step in, and sidewalks.
I think you said parking as well.
Parking is a big one.
Ratio.
And floor
area ratio.
and floor area ratio, just to start, and then add all the other ones that your staff tell you are the real
Yeah.
hot spots.
And I think, again, the example I gave from Kirkland, I think was a good example where there was a concern expressed. It was impacting the business community, as in this particular instance. The city council went through their policy-making process, relied upon their staff and their planning commission to review this issue. It's the same kind of thing we're talking about here. We have this list, and I have a couple of examples. To reiterate, Councilmember Wagner, I think we are kind of saying the same thing in the context of that really looking at the development standards or the regulations is where I think you get the biggest bang for your buck. What we need to do is to ensure that you're getting a full picture, because there will be trade-offs. If you have passed a comprehensive plan that has a certain goal, 20-year goal for the city, and if what you're seeking is to modify that, then we need to help you recognize that, because that has its own process. If it's something that can be quickly addressed in the context of a code section that doesn't require a lot of process attached to it, to Councilmember Pelosa's point about getting to action sooner, then we can work with you and possibly bring that through quicker. So I think we've got a good list.
Great. Now, I've got a backup of people. Bob's first.
Well,
Ian?
we've already talked about some of these issues that I was going to bring up earlier, but at what point in time are we allowed to give waivers on some of these regulations?
Well, there's a couple of answers to that. It depends on the subject matter. So, for example, you've heard this before, if you adopt traffic impact fees and you want to waive them, like you have done in the 4-block area in downtown, the 4 blocks that are immediately to the south and east of us, it's not for free. The general fund pays for that, and that's per state law. You have allowed, in codes, you've allowed variances. You've allowed administrative variance where you don't have to go through a big process. We can do that at the staff level to a certain degree, and then beyond that, you have to go to the hearing examiner. So it depends on the subject matter in terms of waivers or variances.
Take Councilmember Holman's discussion item.
Yeah.
Where in there could we implement waivers or some discretionary thing that would be, shall we say, in your bailiwick?
I think that number one, we'd have to revisit the code because it's written very strictly today. There is no opportunity and it's black and white for staff. We literally, and it's a hard message to carry to customers, particularly when they're small projects, that because of the way that the code's written and it's been implemented by staff per council direction, we'd have to modify that code language and either introduce that flexibility
That
or
would be
change it
something
altogether.
that the planning department would bring forward to us to review as a possible change.
Yeah, and again, working with Ingrid and her team, you would need to understand the implications of any changes.
There's
and we need
several
to do
good
that.
examples that John gave that the contractor would be faced with horrendous costs. How many of those things do we really need and to impose on this contractor? If we really want the business to come into our city, we need to take bold steps, and I think that we need to have some discretion. And if it's something that cannot be, if, like you say, black and white, then we need to bring those issues maybe back to the council for us to review those.
And I think that's a fair point. I think, and you'll hear this mantra from me and probably other staff, is there's two sets of customers. There's the customer immediately in front of you, the one you're trying to serve, the developer or the business owner, and then there's the long-term customer. That's the citizens who are here today or will be here 20 years down the road. And we need to balance the interests of both. So that's when we say trying to give you a complete picture, we want to make sure that you as a council members have the full gamut of thought process so that if you do make changes, you know that you're making the changes because of this, and here's the impact either today or tomorrow.
Okay, we have Councilmember Pelosi and then Councilmember Wagner.
I'll refer you to page 4 of your white paper. And it's the last paragraph, concluding thoughts, and it's the 8th line from the bottom. I just want to comment on this. I believe that what really attracts or retains developers and businesses is a quality city with robust and well-maintained structure. And that's why the Trek and Merrill Gardens is over there in that Promenade Street. All they had to do was plug in. And that was a big deal for this city because we as a council, we voted on that promenade. Wasn't it 9 million what it came to?
About 10.
10, 9, 10 million. So we did good, and look what happened. Wonderful things.
And I think that's part of the point I'm trying to make to the council.
Yeah,
is
and I'm just saying, I agree with you wholeheartedly with your statement.
we can work on the regulatory side with council, certainly.
Councilmember Wagner.
Well, Councilmember Pelosi probably remembers when we did conditional use permits at the council level instead of the hearing examiner level.
Right.
And it got very politicized. Who was your friend, who didn't you like? And so our Washington City's Insurance Authority said, quit doing that because we're getting sued all over the state for taking care of your friends. So we moved that over. But at the same time, what we did was give a lot more administrative authority to these guys that we trust. And take the Trek, for example. You were supposed to, or we were supposed to have white sidewalks. Administratively, they were, well, it'd make them narrower. And there's a lot of stuff like that that we've passed back to the capable administrators, and we should do more of it.
Yeah.
Is what I'm getting. The bottom line is we ought to go through our stuff and see how much more can we get back to them.
Okay, we're going to take, Councilmember Holman and then Councilmember DeCoursey.
With, considering what I just said about the regulation, we also must maintain awareness of why we have codes in the first place, the real reason we have codes, and that's public safety. Houston should serve as a real example to all of us. They basically threw zoning out the door and they would approve anything, anywhere, and when they had a catastrophic rainstorm, half their city flooded with horrible financial loss. So we must not compromise on safety. We get to Florida area ratio. That's a classic example. Right now, we have a height limit on how high a building can go in this city. Well, that has no bearing on the safety or public well-being, but the Florida area ratio does. And that and engineering and sound engineering and a good code that recognizes a Florida area ratio and the engineering that goes with it should dictate the height of a building. It's just little things like that we need to step in, but never forgetting the main purpose is life, safety, and the quality of life. And when we can bend the trend a little bit, as the Puget Sound Regional Council is famous for saying, when we can bend the trend a bit, that's a good thing. But we can't throw these years of scientific research and quite honestly, all the other Houston bad examples out, we must maintain a certain amount of sanity in maintaining some of these rules. They're for a reason. But the arbitrary ones or the unintended consequences, we really need to address them. So I will shut up and say no more.
Just as a point of information, my oldest son, he's based out of Portland, operates a couple businesses down there, one that he owns solely and operates, another he owns with a partner, and the other he owns with a partner is a franchise business that he started in Portland. And he's been thinking about coming to Auburn at some point in time. Of course, he's trying to open 3 establishments in the Portland area now with the one he has. They're opening up their first one at the first of the year in Camas, and 2 others after that. So at some point in time, expanding out, but he's looking at this area because he knows Auburn well enough because his dad lives here and his mother lives here. That's a prime area to move into. And very graciously, Doug Lean has sent him some information on potential locations that he could research and look at. But his question to me when we talked about this was, he said, what are the incentives the city offers for me to move my business to Auburn? He wasn't talking in terms of dollars and cents. He's talking in terms of, what can the city do for me to help me open my business in the shortest time possible so I can start bringing business in and be profitable as quickly as possible? So his opportunity to look at this is, if I have a city I can go to and be open in 90 days, and you're telling me you can't let me open until 180 days, guess what? I'm moving to 90 days before I go to 180 days. So I think it's what we have to look at. For me, it's small business. It's a lot of small business. But I think we have to look at, in addition to the flexibility we allow administrative staff to have, is what can this council do to provide an incentive for small businesses to move into our community as quickly as possible, as time allows, to get their businesses up and running so they can be in business, make money, be profitable, and it serves the best intention of the community to do that as well.
And I'm just going to take one step further. I talk to small businesses here all the time that can't expand, that are ready to expand, and it's too cost prohibitive. Those are the contacts that I get. They're already here, and they don't feel like the climate is such that they can afford to expand. Councilmember Wagner.
I got a specific suggestion on that one. We're allowed to change the SEPA review level trigger. And I don't think we've gone as low as we could for that. SEPA review just adds cost and time.
Can you explain what you just said?
State Environmental Policy Act.
Oh, okay.
At a certain amount of square feet in dollars, I think is the way our code reads, you got to do SEPA. And that's going to cost you at least a month. maybe a couple of months.
SEPA, not FIFA.
Yes, CPA.
Okay.
We're going to take a break now for 10 minutes or 9. Okay? Thank you. she's good. The team isn't doing
100 years from now, someone may say, why weren't they wise enough to put in 10-foot sidewalks?
They'll say that in 10 years.
Yeah, not 100.
She's doing fine.
I,
Lots of saves.
Please bring them up.
Yeah, he's cold, he's been down on the couch.
I wanted the conversation when we started talking about development incentives.
Yeah, he was. Yeah, he was. Yeah, he got the engine out, yeah, it's on an engine hoist turned into the stand. Oh, did you?
Wanted to raise up real quick and bang his head.
Yeah, no, that's the worst thing. That wouldn't be good.
I'm sorry. Oh, good. Isn't he a nice young man? Okay, but you know which way he's going. So, yeah. Okay, so I just want to let you know.
Anyway.
Well, thank you, and I hope I didn't burn bridges. I'll sit down and I do want to hear it. Maybe your next
put
drive.
Rich on it.
Yeah.
I got a copy of the letter, but my response.
You don't have to take sides.
I literally got
I
it
know
an
you don't.
hour before I walked in.
It's a good message for us to share with you.
I'm not bound by that.
I'm happy to share.
Yeah, but I got that about an hour before I walked in here and I had other things.
And we do go after it.
Well, hopefully, we're up against it.
I've hung around developers, a neighbor, John McKenna. Yeah, I know their personalities. They're a little bit in your face and a little pushy.
Sounds like a Bill problem.
Well, he hasn't always been.
No, that's true.
He took on the city of Renton and won.
Maybe he's not.
Over Mount Olivet.
Personal.
Thank you for, I think it was a great training. No, otherwise it would have.
I never want to burn this bridge.
She announced that at the last time. She announced that at the last.
Except she's concerned about.
Not being used in parking.
Hey, John.
Gotta be quick.
They severed the long head of the biceps on the intercept. So if you have your rotator cuff, there's a groove that it's supposed to follow in the muscle, and it was out of its groove. So they
See
just-
what they say after my MRI. Well, after,
Is that right?
already had it. Yeah.
Did you go to the doctor today?
No, I didn't go to, he's on vacation. I was hoping to get in on Wednesday, because I'm going to the dentist Wednesday anyway, so I figured I'd get two birds, one
Well, you
stone.
probably need a root canal or two, I'm sure.
Well, you know, so you are just not helping matters much. Thank you very much.
You need a joint surgery and a
Yeah.
root canal.
So I'm going to go to the doctor the following Tuesday.
What, if you have to have a root canal, get it done now and then schedule the crown after the first of the year when insurance rolls over. That's what I did.
Well, I have special insurance.
good
As HR
strategy. I never
director,
thought of
I have
that.
better insurance than you guys.
Oh, I bet.
Yeah, mine's okay. Yeah.
So
Oh, I'm
I
sorry.
had the root canal about 3 weeks ago, and I wanted to have it in November, but I said, just
Yeah,
put a nice
one of the perks.
filling in there, and they did. So my dentist is calling me to set up for the crown. I said, you're not gonna see me till after January 1. I'll come in on January 2nd. And it's $2,000 for
Everybody
the
looked at
crown.
me cross-eyed.
And my
All the other
benefit's
chiefs.
only 1,500. So I figured if I go in now, I can get
Was Renton there?
Yeah.
2,000.
They're the ones that should know it because they're the ones that got
1,000 or 1,200.
left holding the.
Waiting.
Got quite a few of them. So we got
The Novocaine, she had to really shoot, she had to stop and give me
bend
one
the trend. I like that. Bend the trend.
extra special. I fell asleep. Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Just yapping away.
The trend.
And then I kind of
like that,
woke up.
Yeah, I do.
Said, I think she's asleep. I didn't want to say that I'd fallen asleep.
Okay.
I couldn't say anything.
Okay, here we go, guys and gals. We're switching the agenda. We're putting B for boy first, dangerous dogs. Dogs. And Mr. Bill is going to introduce himself and take over.
All right. For the record, Bill Pearson, Assistant Chief of Police with Auburn PD. I'm going to go over tonight our dangerous dog ordinance. I know it's been a while since the ordinance was passed several years ago. Of course, as you can imagine, our animal control activities have done nothing but grow. Since the service was enacted, it started off kind of slow, but as you can imagine, people see it's there, and now we're doing quite a bit of stuff out there for animal control. Don't know if you guys are aware, but our animal control officer, Mr. Winter, moved on to another department in the city. And so we are in the hunt with trying to find another officer. And just to remind you also that council did approve one more officer in January of 18, so we'll have 2. And we desperately need that with the amount of activity. It'll give us everyday coverage, minus holidays and vacations and things like that, but we'll be able to ramp that up and do much better. So the ordinance I wanted to just go over briefly because I want you guys to have ample time to discuss some of the issues that may be coming up with some of your constituents, but it's chapter 635 titled Dangerous Dogs. I also provided you a packet, some documents look like these. I don't know if you looked at those, and I can go over each one of those and tell you how we use those and then how the process goes. So currently, when it comes to the dangerous dog ordinance, the animal control officer works under two areas. One is potentially dangerous, and the other is dangerous, and they're two significantly different things. So if I were to talk to you about potentially dangerous, it's subsection 25 under the city code. But basically, I call it a lesser crime committed by the dog. And Section A talks about inflicting a bite on a human or domestic animal, or either on public or in private property. Chases or approaches a person, kind of a menacing fashion. And
Ask a question on that one?
Yes, sir.
That has always looked a little hard to interpret for me. Does it mean that the dog is on the sidewalk or the person is on the sidewalk?
A lot of times it just depends on where the bite occurs.
Well, no, I'm talking this threatening. There's plenty of dogs that are back of a 4-foot fence and look really threatening, or you on the sidewalk, and they can jump over it if they want to. And this paragraph doesn't tell me what to do about it.
Well, if we go and investigate even an animal that's behind a fence, and every time somebody walks down the sidewalk and the fence is on the public right-of-way, and I have to walk down that sidewalk, and every time I do, I have to flinch because this dog is just chasing me down, this more than likely will fit that fact pattern.
Well, and that's exactly what you're saying you do is what I would hope you would do. But
Yes.
I think this ought to be clarified.
So what would you like to see in there?
Stalking dog.
No, what kind of language would you like
I
to see?
haven't really thought through it, but it has to somehow say the dog doesn't have to be out on the sidewalk with you. It can be behind a fence.
Okay, Dan, can you?
I think what we're focused on here is the menacing
Dangerous
fashion.
dog or a potentially dangerous dog are we talking?
Potentially.
Potentially.
Potentially dangerous dog has a little bit more flexibility than dangerous dog. And in Auburn, we do different than a lot of cities that do have that demarcation. We actually allow dangerous dogs to exist so long as they do comply with the regulations, insurance, and fencing and things like that. So, but for potentially dangerous dogs, there are some things you have to do that are not nearly as strict as a designated dangerous dog.
Right.
And we can, we can bring you that. Maybe Bill and I'll work on a comparison chart.
Yeah, I think what Councilmember Wagner's focusing in on here is that it's kind of vague. He's looking for more specific language about the dog doesn't necessarily have to be out of that fenced area to commit this menacing act. It can actually be behind the fence as well.
Well,
currently
we
we
actually
enforce
are
it that way, but it doesn't state that.
Yeah, we're actually working on, actually had a case where the dog bit through the fence, and we consider that to be outside the fence.
But you aren't interpreting the way Bill is?
Well, I think you agreed with that, didn't you?
Yeah, that was actually a dangerous dog case where a dog actually stuck its head through a fence and bit somebody.
But Bill says if this potentially dangerous dog is barking real bad at you and the fence looks like you think he can jump over it, he can cite you as a potentially dangerous dog. And yet I'm saying it's very vague here in this paragraph B, whether he can do that.
Well,
John, you want to make an input? Go
I
ahead.
do, thank you, Bill. If we start making these laws more specific, the reality is for the officer in the field, it reduces their discretion. Right now, he's got some wiggle room on this, and the ability whether he'll convict or not in court is on how well he will explain that that dog that was charging the fence was more than capable of jumping over. You know, he's going to explain in words to a judge or a jury and carry the day more than likely. But if we start restricting it, then his or hers options start diminishing because it's restrictive both ways.
Yeah.
So I like having wiggle room and depending on the officer's ability to explain things in a court of law or to the victim or to the suspect.
Makes sense.
Because some people, you know, that's a menacing chihuahua on the best of that 6-foot chain link fence.
So currently, we do enforce this with the idea that even if it's behind a fence, that when people are walking down a public sidewalk, they should not be exposed to a dog scaring the heck out of them as they walk down the sidewalk. And we do go and talk to owners, and if they don't fix the problem, they'll be issued a declaration of potentially dangerous dog.
Okay,
So that-
everybody satisfied with that?
Well, then you cleared something up, because I know in my neighborhood, there's a dog that every time I go by that dog, I have to go across because that dog scares the out of me every time I walk by there, because it just comes running and he jumps on the fence, and he's a pretty good sized dog. So he does that to every person if he's outdoors. So
Somebody's just got to call us.
call you guys and you go, okay.
Okay. Go ahead, Bill.
Okay. And then lastly, on the potentially dangerous dog side of the house, we deal with the specific breeds that were agreed to by council that we also consider. So these persons who come into the city, if you have this breed, you are required to simply register your dog with the city that you have a potentially dangerous dog based on breed. The other side of the house, which we seem to have been dealing with a lot more lately, is the dangerous dog side. Now, dangerous dog side is a more elevated piece to this, and it basically refers to animals that kill or inflict severe injury on human being without provocation on public or private, killed or inflicted severe injury on domestic animals, or you've been previously found to be potentially dangerous, meaning under that old statute, and you now inflict a bite on a human. And if you have a potentially dangerous dog and you allow it to just merely run free. So if either of these are met, then we may issue you a declaration of dangerous dog. Now, with dangerous dog and potentially dangerous dog are restrictions or certifications that you are required. So if your animal is labeled potentially dangerous, then you are going to be required to have some form of muzzle. You have to keep it fenced in an area. You have to create a fence and just merely control the dog a lot more. Now, if you have a dangerous dog, then the expense to the owner goes up exponentially. You're required to get a surety bond for a minimum of $250,000, or have liability insurance. Typically, it's homeowners. You have to put signage up around your residence. You have to build a structure that when the dog is not inside the home, but if outside the home, that it actually has a top on it as well. And it has to be built out of the elements, so it can't be built directly in the sunlight or anything like that. So those are what you have to have for a dangerous dog. And finally, for a dangerous dog, if you take it outside of that, it has to be with somebody over the age of 16. It has to be on a leash that can hold a 75-pound or 100-pound dog, and the dog has to be muzzled at all times. So,
Bill, I've been looking through all of these documents here and everything. Is there a specific place in here somewhere where it does talk about a specific breed of dog?
yes, if you go to Auburn City Code 635.
What page?
I don't have your guys' packet in
Oh,
front of
you
me.
don't, okay.
So I think it's 635.
I'm looking at that right now.
030. No, actually, go to definitions. Do you guys have the definitions piece with you at all?
Don't think so.
635.010.
So if you go to definitions and you go to,
We don't have that in here.
Dangerous dogs, it's page 2.
The definitions of the breeds.
I see it referenced in the section here, but I don't think we have it in that.
Naming of the breeds.
The naming of the breed.
Right, I didn't see it either.
yeah. So if you go to section 635.010 under definitions, definition number 25, it will actually say potentially dangerous. And under D, I can pass this around if you guys want to look at it, but anyway, it's under section D, and there's probably, I would say, 15 different breeds in there that.
I thought there was at one time. I was looking at
Yes.
that. And, yeah, okay, thank you.
Why
missed something in the
why this
package.
chapter doesn't reflect that?
It references the section, but it doesn't include it.
I think what happens is you guys didn't get the full definition, all the definitions for the ordinance. Sure, you can go online, it's right in there.
So if we go to 6.35, it'll be there.
Under definitions, you'll see it.
Oh,
Yep.
no, yeah,
Yep.
thank you.
And again, the breed specific is under potentially dangerous. So. All right, so when we do get these calls of different types of provocations or bites, or our animal control officer will arrive on scene and through witnesses just do an investigation to determine what happened. We have the first form I want to show you is page 1 of 6 of our numbering, probably not your packet numbering, but 1 of 6. And this one is titled Notice of Intent to Declare a Dog As, and there's 2 checkboxes. One says dangerous, and the other one says potentially dangerous. This is just merely a cover sheet where we identify the owner's name and the description of the dog. This thing comes in a big packet. The next one is 2 of 6, and that is the types of bases of declaration and reasoning. Again, we mark either dangerous or potentially dangerous, and our animal control officer will just merely fill this out in his car on his computer and just give the homeowner just a real quick synopsis of why he is declaring the dog dangerous or potentially dangerous. The next one is page 3 of 6, which is called Rights Upon Notification and Preliminary Decision. What this form does is notify the owner of the dog that's potentially dangerous or dangerous that they have the right under the city code to have due process, and that means they have the right to go to the first step of appeal. What they're appealing is the declaration made by the officer. They're just saying that I don't believe that it fits, or I have some mitigation on why my animal should not be declared dangerous or potentially dangerous. We set the meeting time within 10 days, which is required by the city code, and then the person who owns the dog will deliver this to the police department, and I will get notified, and then we will set up a meeting date that is agreeable upon the dog owner to meet with me. Now, what happens in that, and I have probably done 15 to 20 of them since this ordinance has been, I read through the investigation, they come in, they provide information to me, and then I make a determination, did our animal control officer make the right decision based on my opinion on how the law fits. All but one of them I have determined that we made the right decision on that. The other one that was not, that I disagreed with our officer, is that in his investigation he did not establish that this happened on public property as opposed to private property was required. And so we let that one go. But there were some other circumstances. But the majority of them are pretty fact-specific to what occurred.
So, Bill, is this rights of notification and decision, is this in conjunction with the predetermined list of dangerous or potentially dangerous, or can this be any dog?
This can be any dog. This is not breed specific. So breed specific means if you have a certain breed, this animal has to be registered. If that breed is registered and that specific breed bites somebody or another domestic animal, it's going to be determined to be dangerous at that point. So it graduates itself up from potentially dangerous based on its breed to the next. So this fits all animals. Page 4 of 6, these are the 7 areas that are the dangerous dog requirements. So if their dog is declared to be dangerous, these are the 7 things that they need to accomplish before they'll get their dog back if we impound it.
Do you ever end up keeping a dog?
There are times, because when you look at these, some of these are pretty strict requirements, and some people aren't able to meet these. And if the dog is not adoptable, then Auburn Valley Humane Society determines what its outcome is. Page 5 of 6 is the potentially dangerous dog requirement. As you can see, they are less intrusive to the homeowner, and probably 9 out of 10 times they can meet the potentially dangerous dog requirements. Most of those are just really just being a responsible pet owner. Okay. Page 6 of 6 is just really when they do get the surety bond or the insurance bond, that we have record of it, and this is what we use to determine that record. The last page you have is a hearing examiner appeal. The appeal, to me, is not the final step for an owner who's got a dangerous or potentially dangerous. They can actually appeal that to the city clerk and actually get a hearing examiner that's paid for by the city to listen to their case as well.
Now, there's a hearing examiner meeting November when I'm gone. I was going to go to it because those are always interesting. On the week of November 13th, they're going to be talking about a dangerous dog.
Okay.
Now, the hearing examiner. I think it's on the 15th or 16th, here, Chambers.
Well, I'm the hearing examiner for the first appeal. They have a due process to go.
Oh, this is an appeal.
This is appeal to my decision.
Oh.
So it goes one more step.
Oh, okay.
To the hearing examiner, which I believe is a paid attorney who comes in for the city, not only hears this case, but might also hear a land use case at the same time.
It is. It's the same hearing examiner.
There.
Yeah, just for the definitions of the potentially dangerous dogs and the breed. So 6.35.010 has actually been repealed, and it moved it to a different section. That's what I was over looking for. It's 6.01.010, and that's where it's number 25D.
What was that again?
6.01.010, definitions under animal control. So it was removed from the dangerous dogs chapter 6.35, and it was moved under animal control general provisions. And it's 6.01.010, and it's number 25D, as in dog. And it gives all of the different breeds, but potentially dangerous dogs are not limited by breed. But these are the breeds that are specific, but potentially dangerous dog is not limited to just those breeds listed there.
Any other questions?
A dog could be deemed potentially dangerous based on its behavior, not just its breed. That's basically what that means.
Any other questions for Bill? So we can go home and take care of his foot. Thanks, Bill.
All right, thank you.
Everybody is up to speed now.
All right.
Appreciate
Good job,
it.
Scooter.
Thanks.
So, our next topic is King County Draft 2019 Comprehensive Solid Waste Management Plan. Joan Nelson. Before you guys get started, I put one of these around everybody's places. Joan and I went up to the Factoria Recycling and Transfer Station today for their grand opening. And boy, it's look this over, it's really cool. So just think in a couple of years, Algona will have something like this. So anyway.
So we're just loading up the screens. So I do have a PowerPoint to go accompany the memo that's in your packet. This is just a overview.
Pretty much says, well, it's a little bit more.
Yeah. Trying to get back to the.
What'd you just do?
Oh, there we go. Okay.
This is the picture they really like.
There's a better picture than this one. So, so that's a picture up at Cedar Hills of the garbage flowing out of one of the tippers. That happens on a daily basis. So we are we have an interlocal agreement with King County so that we work together with them. They prepared this comprehensive plan that is going to be released for public review shortly. These interlocal agreements were originally started in 1988 to 2028, but there was an extension that happened in 2013 to extend it out to 2040, mostly for long-term bonding for the capital projects like the Factoria transfer station that you see pictures of, which is an amazing facility. It also, part of our interlocal agreement says that all of the waste generated within our city limits goes to the King County system. So that's why the portion of our Pierce County, the waste goes to King County system, even though that is technically Pierce County.
Joan, back please.
Yes.
That third bullet, you guys. 14 years ago, I was assigned to this committee. At that time, the Cedar Hills landfill was supposed to close in 2016. 2016. And because of all the innovations that have been going on, because of all the recycling that has happened in all these past years. But, and I've preached this before, 70% of what goes to Cedar Hills could be recycled material. So that 2040 that you see, extending it to 2040, I predict that it'll go 2050. Once we start getting everybody to recycle the way they should recycle, it will be. Yes, go ahead.
Joan, are you going to go over some of the recycling requirements, like whether somebody can sift through the garbage before it gets to the landfill, and that kind of thing?
I wasn't planning on going to that level of detail at this. This is kind of just to introduce you to this comprehensive plan that's going to be out for public review. So, but definitely,
Go ahead, Claude.
Just as a point of information, and you're talking about recycling bill in Cedar Hills, when I was at the Housing Authority, we did a large redevelopment on the east hill of Kent. It was a 2-year project to completely demolish and renovate approximately 300 units of public housing. And we went into action with our contractor to make sure we did not impact the Cedar Hills development. And we received the Recycler of the Year award for diverting 240 tons of construction waste from the Cedar Hills landfill to recycling. So it can be done.
Yes, it can.
So the two advisory committees that King County works with are the Solid Waste Advisory Committee, which was established in 1985. This is made up of cities, citizens, the haulers, public interest groups. It's a wide variety. So they meet on a monthly basis. And then we also have the Metropolitan Solid Waste Management Advisory Committee, which Councilmember Pelosa is the city representative on. That is elected officials and city staff. So King County takes input from a variety of sources when they make decisions in policy. Oh, there we go. Oh, there we go. It's sticking. Oh, there we go. Okay. So this is, oh, there we go. So this is the map of King County. It's hard, it's difficult to see, but there are 6 urban transfer stations, of which Algona is considered one of the urban stations. There's 2 rural, Vashon and Enumclaw, and then there's a drop box in Cedar Falls. So it's quite an extensive system, and if you can see the little kind of boxes, they do try to have an equitable system and have those stations throughout the county. Yeah, it's gonna take it a second. Okay, there. So this is a picture of what our Algona transfer station looks like right now. The new transfer station is sited to open in 2022. They did choose the site, as you know, just north of the existing station to build on. And we did hear today that King County Council approved the agreement with City of Algona. It moved out of committee and it'll be approved by the council at their November meeting is where that's scheduled to happen. So, and the City of Algona already approved the agreement on their side. So that project is moving forward. So the solid waste comp plan, why we're here, Washington State requires that each county prepare a comprehensive solid waste management plan. So the current plan right now is from 2001. As you know, technology and there's been major advances in recycling. There were updated plans in 2011 and 2013, but they didn't make it all the way through the approval process. So right now, there's in the memo, there's the tentative schedule for going through the approval process. They should be hopefully releasing the draft plan sometime in December. It may move out to January, just depends, but hopefully adoption in 2019. The main goals of the comp plan, as Councilmember Pelosa touched on, is to achieve zero waste of resources by 2030. They do have an interim goal of a 70% recycling rate, and they want to eliminate the disposal of anything with economic value. So their first priority is waste reduction and reuse, and then you go on to product stewardship and recycling. And then that helps you reach that goal of keeping the tipping fee as low as possible, because extending Cedar Hills is the cheapest disposal option for the county. So the more we recycle, the more we reduce waste, the lower our fees will remain.
Joan?
Yes.
Tipping fees are what the haulers pay to dump the garbage in to the transfer stations and then onto Cedar Hill.
So this is just some pictures of the Cedar Hills landfill. There's an aerial shot. The top right-hand corner is Area 7 when it was being constructed. That's the current site. We also are going to have an Area 8 that will be developed. The picture on the right middle is their landfill gas to energy project, which is taking the landfill gas, converting it to energy, and they're actually selling it into the PSE system. So it's being flared off and burned. They're actually having value. And then the bottom right are those tippers that tip the garbage onto the active floor. So some major updates and changes, these are also in the memo, is a reevaluation of the 2007 transfer plan. There's been a lot of discussion. One of the biggest things is the Northeast Transfer Station, what will happen when Houghton closes. Originally, when all of the cities signed on to the revised interlocal agreement and extended it out to 2040. Bellevue and the 5-point cities like Medina and Yarrow Point chose not to sign on, and that just recently changed. They recently have agreed to sign on, so they had to kind of relook at the Northeast Station and what they're going to do. Bellevue definitely wants there to be a new Northeast Station sited. They don't want any extra tonnage going to Factoria, so that's one of their sticking points. And they're also leaving the option, there's a Renton transfer station that originally they were going to close, but now they want to leave that as an option to keep if they need to. Also looking at resource recovery at transfer stations. This is where when someone comes in with a mixed load and they have a lot of cardboard or wood, they actually have staff at the transfer stations pull that cardboard and wood off to be recycled. And that's something that they've started at some of the transfer stations, and they've seen a lot of tonnage diverted through those options. Also, maybe considering policy changes like mandatory recycling. Many cities don't have it mandatory. We offer it, but we don't, it's not mandatory. And then what you had mentioned, Councilmember DeCoursey, construction, demolition, recycling standards. King County is working with cities and developing code language to require job sites to have construction, demolition, recycling available and enhance those opportunities. We're also looking at technology like anaerobic digestion as an alternative for some of the food waste. So new technologies are bringing new options. And then optimizing development of Cedar Hills. We have the different areas, Area 7, Area 8. There's also, in this comp plan, they show how many more years they may get by actually closed sections of the landfill that have settled. As the garbage breaks down, they potentially can go a little higher and add more to those to add more life. And then the long-term disposal, once Cedar Hills is completely full, what are our options? Waste to energy, long haul. They're keeping their options open and looking at everything. And any questions?
What's all that about?
Oh, isn't that great?
What is that?
That's your mattress cake.
This is mattress cake, yes. Oh. So Councilmember Pelosa, King County Solid Waste Division, when he was chair and ended being chair, they know how passionate he is about mattress recycling, and they had a mattress cake made for him. So.
That's great.
Good cake. Yes.
How many composting places are there? Just Cedar Grove?
There's not just Cedar Grove. That's where King County sends theirs, and that's where I know our hauler waste management has a contract with Cedar Grove. But there's one called Lens up in Everett. There's Silver Springs down south. So there are a few more. They're hard to get cited due to permitting and things like that.
Well, a lot of that 70% of potential recycling is food waste.
Yes.
And it'll probably go to those composting facilities. Do you know if that's addressed in the comp plan?
I know that's why they're looking at other options like anaerobic digestion and things to expand our options for, those are private facilities, and they do talk about working with private facilities to expand. So they do have actions in there that talks about working with private facilities such as Cedar Grove.
Mayor?
We have a company in Auburn that is building those types of machinery. It's down at Laser Cutting Northwest. Pete Atuka has several small business startups that utilize his space, and that is one of those companies that's down there. That's great. It's really interesting the way that it works.
Okay. Thank you.
Turn that off, would you please?
And the glare from your head is...
I know it.
You're kind of letting your hair grow, too.
Okay, hey, thanks, you guys. Good presentation. Okay, we're going to go to King County Court update, Roscoe. And Mr. Roscoe can do this in 2 minutes, I know.
Well, that's up to you guys. I'm here to answer questions. Good evening. I gave a brief one-page summary trying to outline projected costs as to what it would have cost us had we remained at municipal court, which is a little bit of an art, got to be honest, because of salaries, and you don't really know where things would have ended up, as well as staffing levels. They can fluctuate. The first table is our current district court costs. So those are actuals. 2017 is projected, obviously, because we don't get billed until we're in the rears. The municipal court, the big difference there is, as you can see, probation expenditures. We were running very high when we had a muni court. We had, I think it was 7 probation officers. Just for comparative purposes, City of Renton, that's 1.5. So we were historically very high in the probation department. In some of our cases, we had upwards of 700 people being monitored on probation at any given time. Thus the need for 7 officers. But you can see then the delta or the difference between the two is then highlighted in yellow. So we are running.
Yellow?
Oh, do you not have, oh, I'm sorry, just in parentheses then on that second. My sheet had it. Well, you can see we had.
I'm sorry. Council member.
On the probation costs, with us spending less and offloading that to King County, do they take all the liability risk then if somebody sues us?
They do. That is one of the main advantages of contracting those services, and probation is one of those high-risk exposures because courts have said it can create what's called a special duty to victims. So we have an obligation to make sure that we're supervising correctly.
So we really are saving more money than this because we're not having to pay a big insurance bill to insure against that.
Correct. That's this is only the direct cost. Then you have those indirect costs, and sometimes that can be that tip of the iceberg. You're just seeing the tip, and below it's a lot larger. I did include Auburn's case filings. This doesn't really have any effect on whether it's a muni court or a district court. It's really the police out in the field citing. But you can see kind of our historical filings and how they've been. We have increased patrol. We have added, I think it's been about, Chief Lee may know, from when we left in 2012, how many officers we've added? I'd say probably about 6 to 10. Yeah, 6 to 10 officers. We still have 3 vacancies. We're working hard to get those filled. Hopefully we get them done
So
before.
there's 14 in the last 4 years.
There you go, 14 in the last 4 years. So we expect those filings to continually increase, especially as we fill those vacancies. Then I also included just our average daily population, that's the ADP for SCORE, just so you had that as well. And you can see that was a significant savings as well, because, and that's somewhat a judicial philosophy as to the judge you may have at the time and their sentencing structure. We had a very, I want to say harsh or very strict judge in the past, and now King County seems to be a little bit more lenient in their sentencing structures as far as days in jail.
So Rob, looking at that bottom chart, 2017 versus 2018, 62 ADP was 3.9 million.
Sure.
And then we dropped down to 51.
And Shelley could probably talk about that a little bit better than I could. I think it had to do with some debt service with the SCORE facility itself. Or
That has to do with what everybody else is doing in the facility. If we drop down, maybe everybody else did drop down. And the budget goes up every year. This is the operating budget only. This doesn't include debt service. And it doesn't relate as you would expect. It depends on what the others are doing, because we got a whole jail, we have a whole jail budget, and it depends on your percentage of use of that jail. And maybe our percentage went down, but maybe everybody else, the big users went down. Rent's gone down, and so we have to pick up a bigger share of the cost.
and the overall costs increase as well.
And they do. They're fully staffed now, and they were suffering with what the PD was suffering with as far as getting corrections officers, but they're fully staffed now and moving along.
So, any other questions I can answer?
Anybody else got anything? Thanks, Rob.
Thank
Good
you.
job. Good report.
All right, enjoy.
Okay, moving right along, we're going to talk about my favorite subject, shopping carts. Randy. Randy.
Just got a quick handout for reference.
Okay. Great.
Not that we're going to talk about these very much, but we might have questions that come up.
Thanks, Randy. Thanks, sir.
I might give you. Pardon me? Sorry, I can't see it. This is really hard to see way up there.
You're on it, slideshow.
Okay. All right. So as Bill mentioned, his favorite topic, shopping carts. So just quickly, I spent quite a bit of time, the mayor as well. We met with some of the stores, but I did a lot of research from around the country on what a lot of the different cities are doing with shopping carts. And as everybody probably knows, it's an issue all the way around the country and in other countries as well. So the handout that I handed you, basically the green tab that you have, that is our current city ordinance. The blue tab is the RCW for Washington State, and then the yellow tab is an alternate shopping cart plan, which some of the other cities use. So basically, across the country, there's 3 different types of train of thought. There's basically the process that we do, which is where we can go in, we can actually pick up the carts, bring them back, and then bill the businesses to get their shopping carts back. There's another train of thought, which just a lot of the cities, most of the cities in Washington use, which is the RCW, which it just makes it illegal for people to take a shopping cart from a store or be in possession of, makes it a misdemeanor. We'll talk about that a little bit as we go through. And then the third option from around the country is it's a combination of what we do, as well as putting a little bit of emphasis on the stores, a little bit of the responsibility back on the stores. So in our Auburn City Code, the purpose of this is that we call this a public nuisance, and all the abandoned shopping carts constitute a public nuisance, and which fits in under our code. The intention is to facilitate the retrieval and abandonment of shopping carts in a manner consistent with state law. The applicability is it pertains to any business that provides shopping carts within the city limits for customers to use. It doesn't matter how many they have, just anybody that has shopping carts falls in underneath of our ordinance. Excuse me. In the regulation, the abandonment, it states that the abandonment is prohibited and shall be unlawful for any person to cause or permit a shopping cart to be abandoned. It also requires that all the shopping carts have identification listed on them. It has to be permanently affixed to each shopping cart, and it has to contain the following information. It contains the identity of the business owner. Has an excerpt in there that's required where it talks about the RCW and the specific language in the RCW. And then the address and phone number of where the cart can be returned. And in our code, that is all required to be posted on each shopping cart somewhere. It also states in there that this is a nuisance, as considered a nuisance. And the enforcement is a civil enforcement in accordance with Chapter 1.25 of the ACC, which is our code enforcement officers that take care of that. When we went through a few years ago, when Gene Serino was kind of led this effort, we built an alternate to this civil enforcement, to the civil enforcement. So what this allowed us to do was when we went out and collected shopping carts, we could then bring them back to our maintenance facility. We would monitor them, tag them, and then monthly bill to the stores what those costs were. And what those costs were is we billed $30 per shopping cart for each shopping cart that we collected. And then if they didn't come and collect them after we sent them notice, which was a certified letter, then we added $70 to that fee. We ended up, some of you were on the council when we discussed this last time, but what we ended up doing is it was costing us about $8,000 a year to do this process, and we were only collecting about $4,000. So we were losing 50% through this process. So that's the alternate that's allowed within our code instead of going the civil fraction. What we added just a couple years ago is we put in the words may in there, because in the original one it was that we shall pick up all shopping carts and we shall bill the stores. And we changed that language and we just removed the shall and put in may. So it still allows us, if we've got a problem store where we can collect their carts and we can get that information back, then we can bill them. We can still go through that process. So is there any questions on our current ordinance before I move on?
So you do have some stores that are more of a problem than others?
I wouldn't say that we really have any stores currently that are a problem. Through the teleconferences that we've had 2 teleconferences with stores. We've had between 7 and 10 stores in the conference calls with us. All of those are doing certain amounts of measures. And you look at some of the stores, and some of the stores that have the largest amount of clientele would appear to be the biggest issue, but they're also doing the biggest enforcement of their own, trying to collect their own carts. So when you think about it, we get a lot of complaints about Walmart carts, but they've got a lot of people that go through that store, and it's a lot of people that don't drive. They go to the bus stop. So on 15th, we've got a ton of Walmart carts that are left out there. But Walmart, after 9 o'clock in the morning, they send out their first crew to go and round up. And I thought that they did it twice a day. I thought they did it just after 9 and then around 4 in the evening. But when we were on the phone with them, they told us that every 2 hours, they have people go to the bus stops, collect their carts. Because they said if they just did it twice a day, they wouldn't have any carts left in the stores. So they're, and I commended them because they do a really good job. You can drive down through there at certain times and not see any carts. So currently, I don't think we have any that are a problem. Everybody is trying their darndest to try and help with this.
I guess I have a comment, though.
Sure.
And that is, it was costing us $8,000 a year.
Yeah.
4 years ago, roughly.
Yeah.
When we stopped the old code.
Correct.
And we were only collecting 4,000.
Yes.
So the overall cost was $4,000.
So the overall cost per year was 4,000.
Correct.
We still have carts all over the downtown area.
Well, I would say
in the neighborhoods.
I realize that. Well, we have a few. I think that I think that we're doing a pretty good job of staying after them. But I would argue that we had just as many carts around when we were enforcing the ordinance as we do now.
I don't agree with you. I really don't.
Yeah.
And, you know, I could stop, take a photo, send it to M&O, blah, 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 but that isn't my job. It's not my job. Anyway, go ahead.
Okay. So any other questions on the city's ordinance, the current ordinance?
What about a cart that someone is living out of? Is that still called a cart at that point, or is that a mobile home?
Mini U-Haul.
Yeah, really. I mean, people are.
There's certain, it's similar, it's looked at in the court's eyes, the way I believe, is similar to a homeless encampment. They still have rights for their property, whether it's in a homeless encampment or whether it's in a cart. So I believe that we would still have to go through the notification process, and I want to say that it's 72 hours notification prior to us taking that cart.
Same thing too.
So.
I was wondering the same thing, you know, because you see a lot of them having one or two, you know, and they're full, and they leave them and they chain them up. So you guys can come and take that, or do you citate it and then come give them a warning? Or how do you do the process of?
So currently, we don't do anything with carts that have what appears to be belongings in them. We have a certain couple areas around town which we believe are people that are actually putting garbage in the carts and then pushing them out on the sidewalk, because the stuff in the cart really does appear to be bags of garbage. So those we will leave sit for a certain amount of time, then pick them up. But if it appears to be somebody's belongings, we don't really mess with it because they don't stay there very long. And there is one particular spot down on Auburn Way South where the one gets chained to the pole, but that's at a bus stop. So we're pretty sure that that person brings their stuff, chains it to the pole, gets on the bus and goes somewhere to do whatever it is, comes back and gets their stuff because it's gone in the evening.
Does that shopping cart belong to him then, or her, whoever it may be?
I think that that's way above my pay grade to make that decision. I think that's with the courts and to actually decide when where that line is at.
It would technically probably still belong to the store, but it may be the store that needs to make the claim for the possession of that shopping cart. We can get involved with notice, and we do, but technically it may still belong to the store even though somebody else is using it.
Go ahead.
This is a question for you, Randy, and Chief Lee. If someone that has one of those carts full of their personal belongings needs to be arrested for some reason, and they're with their cart, where does the cart go while we deal with this so-called potential criminal? Do you store it?
From what I know, it would be similar to a homeless encampment. Like when we get a complaint about a homeless encampment and the police come in and they remove the people out of the camp, then we go in there to take care of that camp, and we find people there. We let them know that, hey, we're going to be back on Monday to clean this up. Get everything out of here that you want because we have to clean it up. So we give them every opportunity to get all their stuff. I believe that the officers, if they encounter somebody like that, they have a certain cube size at score that they're allowed to store stuff.
We'll allow the person to collect some of their more precious value in a smaller group, and then we really try and help that person contact somebody, one of their friends, to take possession of their belongings. So when they do get out, they have their tarps and blankets and those types of things.
And like I say, we typically don't deal with very much, or we're not asked to deal with very much homeless contents in a cart. So.
Well, Randy, I haven't looked at this in detail, but is there anything in here that says that we could or could not make a daily search in the downtown area and neighborhoods surrounding the downtown area for shopping carts?
Doesn't speak to that one way or the other. It does not speak to that one way or the other.
What do you guys think about that, trying to clean up the area of shopping carts? Yes.
You know, I hate to say this, but I don't think it's the best use of Randy's staff's time. But I'd love to see us look at it in relationship to our garbage collection contract in a couple of years. You know, your staff is highly, highly trained. Maybe they could sublet it to me and I could pick up, but, you know, there's got to be a cheaper way and a more effective way to do it, and we don't need to rely on really, really highly trained. If we've got somebody else that's out there doing the routes, it might be something that we want to look at with our garbage collection.
Well, and we might address a little bit of that as we get into the other alternative that a lot of the cities are using around the United States.
Okay.
So,
Well, I have one more question.
sure.
So the city does not try and retrieve any of these abandoned shopping carts in the city?
No, that's absolutely not true. We pick them up. We pick them up every day and deliver them back to the store parking lot.
Well, then why isn't it in this that you do that?
Because it was never part of the ordinance.
Well, but why are you doing something that's not in code?
Because we pick up a lot of stuff on the road and take it somewhere for something that is not in code. It is the most efficient use of our time currently to try and keep the town clear of shopping carts. For example, if we've got a crew that's heading off to a job up on Lee Hill and they're on 8th and they see a shopping cart, they can pick it up and they can run it back to Fred Meyer's, drop it in the parking lot, and continue on their way to go to that job, instead of having to pick it up, bring it all the way back to maintenance and operations, and deal with the whole processing of that shopping cart. And a lot of the shopping carts that we find are within a block or two of the stores. So it's in a very quick, expeditious manner to pick them up and drop them in the parking lot.
Okay.
So just a quick overview. I gave you a copy of the RCW. The majority, working with MRSC and their attorneys, the majority of the cities in Washington State cite this ordinance, and this is all that they have. And basically, this ordinance, it only pertains to, sorry, I lost my train of thought. It only pertains to carts that have a sign affixed to them that lays out the basics for the requirements. The owner of the business, the name and phone number, a copy of this actual RCW listed on the cart. If they don't have a tag on them like that, this Washington State Revised Code does not pertain to that cart. So, but the bulk of the cities in the state refer back to this, and that's all that they do. So the next section, this is the excerpt from shopping cart ordinances from around the country that are different from ours. Basically, they follow kind of the same start. The findings and purpose is abandoned shopping carts constitute a nuisance. The applicability, this chapter applies to each business that provides, I picked this one because it was 25 shopping carts or more for customers' use at any one business location. I saw them anywhere from 0 to 50 carts. So it's all over the board across the United States. It applies any person in possession of a shopping cart off-site from the store. The shopping cart identification signs is very similar to what our municipal code identification requirements are. We have to have the business owner's name, the location, a copy of the RCW. In other states, of course, it's a different regulatory identification. Talks about the unauthorized removal or possession of a shopping cart. It's similar to the RCW for Washington. This is where it kind of starts to change a little bit from what we're used to. In these cities, they actually require the businesses to create a shopping cart plan, and is required for businesses, again, some of them down to one shopping cart and different breakpoints. But what those plans must provide is identifying information for the business, and this is the plan, not on the cart. So in the plan, it identifies the person in charge of the business, so your contact person, the address, the phone number of the business. Requires the number of carts that are kept at that location and identification on the carts. It requires that the stores do public notice and public outreach to their customers. So they have to prominently post, and it's a little smorgasbord of different options that they can do, but they have to post signs at the entrances, they have to post signs at the exits to the parking lots, and those talk about it's illegal for them to remove the shopping carts from the property. It's a violation of state law. The costs or the different interaction with the businesses. The public outreach then is a separate section which they can put on their shopping bags. They can do as flyers that they send out to the public, educating the public on the hazards of the shopping carts and leaving in the neighborhoods and taking them out of the parking lots. So it's a whole little functionality that the stores are required to do this kind of interaction with their customers. Like I talked, the signs are required on the property. They also have to do employee training about what the requirements are for the shopping carts, the returning them into the store, educating them on how to work with the public if they see somebody taking them from the property, to work with them to do that. They actually there's a section that creates loss prevention measures, which can be anything from, they can have locking wheels on them, they can actually put barriers. You know, if you've seen some of the stores, they've got a big pole on the cart, so it actually can't go out of the front door of the store. They have to take their groceries from the cart and then carry them out to their vehicle. They actually make that to where a cart cannot leave the parking lot except out of a driveway. That's the only place they can't block. Some of the stores I noticed, and I put this one in there specifically about the retrieval of shopping carts on a weekly basis, within 72 hours of being notified. It's interesting because the city of Renton just changed their ordinance from something that was like this to more that's like our current code. But they're only going out and they're retrieving shopping carts every Tuesday. One day a week, they go out and retrieve shopping carts. So those shopping carts will sit in the city for 7 days before they actually go out and pick them up. But they're actually hired 2 people to specifically, that's all they're doing is collecting shopping carts. And they believe, with a similar charge to what we were charging, they believe that they're going to be able to fund 2 FTEs on the fees that they collect from the shopping carts. That is a lot of carts, because we did a ton of carts a year, and like I said, we only did $4,000-ish. So it was just an interesting conversation that I had with them. So also, so what they do is they build this plan comes into the city in other cities, and then the city approves this plan. Where the meat and potatoes of this plan is the revocation of the plan. So if somebody is out of compliance with their plan, or they're doing something that gets it revoked, like in one city, that if they found 8 or more of their shopping carts, or if their shopping carts were found on 8 or more occasions within a 6-month period, that would be grounds to revoke their plan. If the owner has failed to to comply with the provisions of this chapter, the owner has knowingly made false statements or anything like that, the plan can be revoked. But what that then does is that it becomes a $50 per day penalty to the business until they get back in compliance. Yes, ma'am.
Do they really enforce that?
They do. I talked to 3 different cities in California with very similar plans to this. Some of them, when they're doing the plans, they give them, like I said, this big smorgasbord of all these ideas that they can do, and then they put together these plans. It sounded fairly labor intensive because you had to look at each and every plan based on each and every individual store. So I would think if we wanted to go this direction, we would probably just do maybe a cookie cutter type of a plan and say, this is your options, this is what you have to do. Because
And how many, that's kind of hard to believe because there's maybe some people that are not going to pay the fine. They don't care if they get those cards back.
But they're tied to their business license. So at the end of the year, if
they're
they've got
gonna-
all these fines, they can't renew their business license until they've settled up their bill.
Bob? Randy, at one time, wasn't the city paying somebody to go around and collect carts a few years ago?
We were not. I mean, our staff does it, but the stores were hiring a company, and it was like Cart Recovery Services or something like that.
Well, it wasn't the city, it
No.
was the stores?
It was the stores. And actually, there's still a couple of stores in town that have a contract with, I don't think it's that same business, but another one. I know that SARS, when we talked to him, they have 2 or 3 stores, which I didn't know that either. I thought this SARS was own and only. They actually hire a company that does all their stores. So, I'm trying to think what was that. So the like I said, the meat of this process is that it doesn't take any work on the city once the plan's revoked. It's an automatic. It starts costing the city until they get in compliance, because that's what we want. We want them to be in compliance. We want them to help us be a part of the solution to maintaining the carts. If we can get them to go out and police the area within 2 or 3 blocks of their store, that's going to take care of the bulk of the carts that we typically see. You know, it's not going to help us a lot with some of the homeless carts and some of the carts that take a long trek. But there was some cities that in there that they talked about, you know, a 2 or 3 block radius around your store or a hotspot, which in the definitions, it was like, we'll use Fred Meyer's for example, you know, a 2 or 3 block radius around there. Then you get to the apartment complexes that are over on 8th over towards the river, which frequent that store a lot. Well, that's a lot further than that 2 or 3 blocks, but it's a hot spot. So then if the city noticed those, they would have to address those in their plans, as that's a place where a lot of their customers live. So the store needs to address those and get those back to their parking area. So the intended goals of this process that we're going through, we're not done yet by any means. But the intended goals is to collaborate with the cart providers. So we want to continue to have open dialogue with stores, get their input, so we can have and put together a process that works not only for us, but for them as well. We want to create standards to reduce or eliminate the carts being abandoned. We want to go through and amend the city code, but we want to go through and do it to where it makes sense and it works for everybody and it's the most cost effective for all. We want that to make sure that we provide clarity so that the council knows exactly what we're doing, so we know what our requirements are and what we're supposed to be doing, and the stores know exactly what they're supposed to be doing. We want to avoid burdensome processes for the city and for the cart providers, because it doesn't help anybody out if it's overbearing. So the process, we want to continue to meet with the cart providers and get a better ideas and feedback via the phone and in person. Like I said, we've had 2 conference calls. They've been fairly well attended. We'd actually like to have a little 2-hour meeting in person to where we can have some one-on-one conversations. And I would like to do that after we kind of put together an idea of what we're looking at, to get it to the stores and then get them in to give us feedback on how they think it'll work. Collect feedback from other stakeholders like the police department, code enforcement, to see how this fits in with what they do and how it affects what code enforcement does. Continue to review what the other cities and cart processes to find out what works and what doesn't. It was interesting in our one of our phone conferences. I had always talked up what Canada does about the stores they're required to have the coin-operated carts in Canada. Well, one of the ladies at one of the stores managed a store in Canada, and she said it's way more hassle than it's worth, because you would think that people would go pick up the carts, bring the carts back to get the change, right? She said they do that, but more often than not, they're out there breaking into the machine, vandalizing the machine. The carts machine doesn't work, they can't get the carts out. So, you know, it seems like every time we figure something out.
Well, along that same line, I know that Safeway has the wheel governance on there, so that when it gets out to the perimeter, it locks up. Is it easy, if you are desperate to keep a cart, to override that or take a screwdriver and break it? Do you know anything about that mechanism?
I do. Well, I don't know a ton about it, but you can. I know that looking online and reading about those, you have the option to get them on 1, 2, 3, or 4 wheels when the store does it. The cheapest way, of course, is 1 wheel. So that's what a lot of them do. What we see at Fred Meyer's, because they've got that system, is I believe that they turn the carts around and pull them backwards, and then the wheels don't lock.
Because one of the things that I wanted to see on there is I wish there was something we could do to the cart so they didn't become someone's mobile home. Like you get off the property and the whole bottom falls out of it, so there's no way for it to hold anything. Or yeah, okay, thank you.
But just as an aside, in some of the stuff that I was reading, some of the people that I talked to, the stores that were really concerned about the walking public from their stores, what they did as part of their plan is that they were allowed to purchase a different kind of cart, a folding cart, and then either sell it or loan it to the public. They were a folding cart, so they could take the groceries out of their regular shopping cart, load them in their personal cart, take them to their house, and then fold their cart up and take it in the house with them, which they said worked fairly well. Whether we want to look at that option, I don't know, but it kind of becomes your own personal cart, and it folds up so you don't have to leave it in the front yard, kind of thing. So we want to continue working with other cities, talking to their processes, and making sure the process that we end up with is going to have the best possible chance of success. We expect to bring something in draft form to the council in early 2018. Some of the possible options and questions we're currently working on as customer outreach programs for the city and for cart providers. What would be entailed in that? You know, what would be our portion? What would be the cart provider portion? Customer notification strategies for the cart providers. All the different options that are allowed, the flyers, the written on the shopping bags, the signs at the stores, all of those kinds of different interactions. What would be entailed in an abandoned shopping cart prevention plan? Would we go with a cookie cutter form? Would we want to do individual ones for individual businesses? We want to look at the loss prevention so they can look at the different credits that they might get for doing the wheels, the locking wheels, or setting it up so the carts can't get out of the store, or they can't get out of the parking lot, or those kinds of things. How to effectively apply the ownership identification to the carts. This was a long conversation because any way that they apply something to the cart, it gets torn off. Yeah. So in the phone conversations, we talked a lot about what we would be using that for, and the idea that actually came from one of the stores was the identification probably really isn't there for the public to be able to read it, other than being able to call somebody. It's more for us, when we find it, to set it up. So they suggested, let's come up with a universal barcode that has all our information on it, and we can apply it somewhere underneath the cart where nobody can see it. And that way, if we see a cart and we need to find out whose it is, because it's had all the decals torn off of it, we can scan it and then we'll know whose it is. So that was a really great idea. I thought that came from the stores. How does the use of an independent cart recovery company fit into the overall plan? Do they even have to do a plan if they can show that they've got a valid contract with a company? Should this apply to everyone that offers a cart down to, so one person or a store has one cart, or should there be a minimum amount of carts? My opinion, it should cover everybody, because even one cart sitting in the middle of the street is a hazard, no matter if they've got 20 or one. So, how to handle carts with personal belongings in them. We talked a little bit about that. We need to dive a lot more into that and figure out the actual direction that we want to do.
It's a bad visual picture.
We want to research those a little bit more to come up with the appropriate action. What's the best way to do enforcement of the new ordinance once in place? So those are the things that we're working on. Those are the ideas that are popping up. We're having a lot of good conversations with other stores, other cities. Like I said, just kind of gives you an update of where I'm at. And I kind of like a little bit of feedback. And if you saw anything that interests you or that you thought was thought-provoking. So,
John first.
Yeah, I want to really I like the fact that you're contacting our business owners and finding a solution that they're part of. Those are the best solutions.
Thank you.
I'm kind of intrigued by the idea of a plan, but I don't want every guy to have to reinvent the wheel when he writes a plan. So I'm wondering if a checklist kind of thing might work. You know, you've mentioned maybe 25 things people could do, so you've got that list, and people can initial it if they're doing that. And then we have some idea of who's really paying attention to this and who isn't. But I don't want them to have to gin up a 4-page plan from white paper. Do you know if anybody else uses a checklist approach?
I think the closest thing to that is there's a few cities that use this philosophy of the cart plan, but they're a cookie cutter. So they go through and they tell them that you have to put out the flyers 4 times a year. You have to have the signage at the store. You have to do one of these 3 things for your cart retrieval. If you have these certain things like the locking wheels or some of those things, you don't have to do anything else. But the ones that don't, then you have to do.
I think that would be a good
So
idea.
it's just basically a flyer. And when they get their business license, okay, this is what you do. And then if you don't stay in compliance with that, then we revoke your plan, and that's when the fines start.
Randy, what's the estimated cost for one of those big Hummers?
For what?
Shopping cart.
It depends on, we talked about that a little bit with the stores too. It depends on whether they're the full plastic ones or the full metal ones. The full plastic ones are about $250. The full metal ones are about $400.
Wow, that's what I heard.
Whoa.
That's almost
How many-
university.
Yes.
How many stores did you talk to locally?
So we sent out emails to all the stores that we had contact information for, and one of the phone to invite them into the phone call or the conference. Thank you. One of them we had 9 stores, and the other one I think we had 12 stores involved in that.
And they all felt about the same way.
They had lots of different ideas, and some were quieter, some just had a couple of ideas. But I think, we're just kind of a cold calling sort of a situation. So we're discussing what we're thinking on one end. They're just hearing it for that instant on the other end, and then throwing up some ideas. So I think if we kind of threw together some generic of the direction we're thinking about going, and sent it out to them so they could digest it for a little while and then actually come in and sit down. Or even if we could just go in smaller groups and go have a discussion about what's going on.
They have a follow-up conference call with them again.
Did you feel that the stores that you contacted were looking for the city's direction and/or policy?
Did I feel they were looking? I thought that they were looking for, that they knew the shopping carts were an issue and they were looking for ways to cure it or at least reduce it, the abandoned shopping carts around town.
Because it can hurt their pocketbook.
It can. Any way that we do it, in the long run, it can hurt their pocketbook. But I think that, we have, since we changed the ordinance and went to the may language in there, 2 times a year, we actually make either a personal visit or a phone call visit to each store in town to talk about the shopping cart ordinance, talk about what we're doing, where we pick up the carts, we drop back in the parking lot, ask for their assistance to try and police the areas right around them close. And I think that if we keep that team effort on this and we work through taking care of these, that 90% of the stores are going to be happy with the process that we get put together because they're going to participate in it. We're still going to have a couple out there that are going to be the ones that aren't going to do it, and we're going to have to go through the fine process to get them in compliance.
So how much, last question, Randy. So what's your timeline on this?
So I would like to, in the first part of 2018, be able to come back to you with a rough draft of what we've actually already met with the stores on to get their feedback. So we could come back, we could actually discuss through what the ordinance would do, what our whole process would be, look for feedback and changes, maybe discuss that at a meeting or two, and then move forward from that.
Rich?
Will you be showing them a cookie cutter plan at that time?
I think that we would start out with a couple of the plans that I found from the other stores and talk about making it into a cookie cutter so they can see what all the requirements are and see how much of a burden it is, and then we can talk about putting it into a cookie cutter type. But when I come back to council, I would have a rough draft of what that cookie cutter would be.
That's it?
Thank
Good
you.
report. Thanks. Appreciate it.
Yep. You guys enjoy your evening.
Okay, one more. And that's the item E, skateboard interlocal draft.
I am. Okay, so in your packet, you have the current proposed draft interlocal for skateboard and a summary of kind of what some of the more significant changes are. So skateboard, South County Area Transportation Board is made up of elected officials that are representing basically South County cities. Purpose of those meetings is to talk about transportation that basically affects all of those jurisdictions, to do some consensus building, share information, coordinate, resolve transportation issues, identify priorities, make recommendations. Several of those recommendations have to do with regional and countywide project selection processes for federal grant funds. The current agreement that was approved in 2013 expires December 31st of this year. So we need a new interlocal for the board to continue operating. The proposed draft is for a minimum 2-year period through the end of 2019 with the ability to extend it for up to 2 additional years to 2021, which is how every previous interlocal has been written. And they're typically renewed about every 4 years. So in your packet, you have just kind of a summary of some of the changes in there. Most of those changes have to do with the operating procedures as opposed to the agreement itself. And the operating procedures have been provided with strike through and underline to show the changes that are in there. The more significant changes include defining what the role of skateboard is a little bit more significantly. There is also a change to the jurisdiction's voting rights on sound transit issues. So the current proposal from skateboard is to include Enumclaw and Black Diamond, who are both currently located outside the RTA, as being able to vote on sound transit issues. They are proposing to remove Pierce County's status from a limited voting partner to not having any vote, and that's because it's Pierce County and this is South King County cities. That puts them basically on the same class as WashDOT and Sound Transit. So they attend the meetings, they participate in the discussions, but they're not a voting member. And then a clarification as to why Renton is not a voting member on Sound Transit within the skateboard agreement, and that is because they actually participate in 2 regional committees, skateboard and the East Side Transportation Partnership, and they actually vote on Sound Transit issues on the East Side Transportation Partnership, so it's not appropriate that they have 2 voices and 2 votes on Sound Transit issues. So, and I don't know if Councilmember Pelosi would like to add any more?
This is just more or less a cleanup since 2013 operating, based on current conditions out there, who's who on the block, who's attending, who isn't attending. And then the last one of these was signed by Mayor Lewis.
In 2013, yes.
Yeah, and basically it'll come right to the mayor. And
So actually, because it's an interlocal agreement, it requires council action on a resolution to approve it. So this
Right.
would require action by the council.
And I think we're only looking at $100 fee a year, $100 a fee, which goes to King County. So it's, yes, Mayor?
So Bill, since you sit on that, maybe you can address why cities outside of the RTA are going to have a voice in things within the RTA.
Yeah, that was talked a little bit, but
It's
no
in here.
conclusions. Yeah, but what I meant was there's no conclusions yet on that, so I will bring it up.
Yeah, so right now there are 2 cities being proposed in this change to have that voting right that are outside the RTA. And there are 2 cities that already have that voting right that was changed in 2013. That's Maple Valley and Covington. Covington, I believe, has a small portion of their more recently annexed area that's actually in the RTA. But Maple Valley is also outside the RTA. So there's some history here as well. Not that I'm advocating that they should have a vote on sound transit issues, because their citizens, while they might be affected by sound transit, they don't pay into the RTA. And the decisions and votes that happen on sound transit could affect what the RTA payees have to do. So it seems like if they want to be part of that, they should probably be part of the RTA. So.
And I will find out.
So
any other questions? Yes, John?
When do you expect this to come forward?
I think they're trying to, before the end of December, I think.
So King County Council wants to take action on this before the end of December. They were originally going to discuss this at the next skateboard meeting, which unfortunately for October has been canceled. So the next time that they discuss this would be in November at skateboard itself. However, I think skateboard, and Bill, you can correct me if I'm wrong, I believe that they approved this out of the last meeting that you had to go to the various cities to be looked at by the council.
Right, as a draft.
As a draft. I don't know that it actually goes back to skateboard for any specific action by skateboard. It's the individual councils.
Yeah, I think the skateboard will probably approve it to go out for final review by the cities and signature.
So my understanding from King County staff is that's what happened at the last meeting. Because they're currently asking us for any final comments on this before going in front of King County Council. And we have indicated a little bit of concern, not knowing exactly how the council would feel about the RTA issue. And they are concerned about that issue, and so if we feel strongly about that, I think that it's going to probably have to come back for some additional conversation at skateboard.
I'll send an email out to King County So, I believe that concludes all of the municipal services discussion items tonight.
Good items.
At 9:10. So any further discussion?
Okay, then
Back to you.
Okay, we'll move into other discussion items.
And I think we all got an email from Mr. Wells about the concern about the new roundabout at 22nd and I. And I think.
No, I didn't get a.
You didn't get it?
Oh, by who?
Oh, his name was Wells.
Oren.
Oren Wells.
Oh, okay. Yes, I did
And
get that.
the reason I'm paying more attention to this than I do to a lot of citizen things is he cited some studies that he had that might give us a different thought process about how this thing should look. But what I said in my email to Ingrid was that several years ago when we first decided to start looking at roundabouts, I did a lot of searching for reports and found that roundabouts are safer for pedestrians if they're designed correctly. And there was a big, almost in caps in these things I said, that if they're designed correctly. And so I thought, well, we really ought to revisit this, even though we've seen it, and see if the designers have done everything they can for pedestrian safety. And so that's why I asked Ingrid to bring this. And the thing that I notice here on the picture is that only one of the pedestrian crossings is well back from the circle. And that was one of the things I found in looking at these, was that was what was recommended. But they also admitted that then people are going to jaywalk right up on the tangent up at the front and not walk down to there. But what some other people had done was build a pedestrian management fence that's kept them from doing the cut across and made them go down to the crosswalk. So that's what I wanted to get you to talk about, even though it's kind of down to junior engineering here, whether we have covered all our bases on pedestrian safety.
So what I did for.
And one of the other questions, if you could answer at the same time, and the same is the cost of it. And he believed there was some cost overrun. So if you could cover all of that, then.
So what I did for tonight is I just pulled some of the information from the presentation we did back in November of 2016 to the study session where we went through and did a feature capital project for 22nd I Street, walked through some of the safety issues and kind of the improvements that were going to be done as part of the project. The project was also put into the winter Auburn magazine, and that's another reason why we did that kind of feature capital project for you all, so that you would have an understanding of that. So in general, what you have up on the screen right now is an overview of what the design for that roundabout is. Basically, we're replacing the sidewalks and pavement, we're installing some new median islands. The actual splitter islands that are in there don't actually have landscaping, they're hardscaping. The only landscaping that you have is a little bit in that center island. And then we're reconfiguring the street lighting also, because we need to make sure that this roundabout is appropriately lit, because that's another piece to it. And this is only a single lane roundabout. So in the email that you all received from the gentleman today, what he's comparing this project to is not quite consistent with what we're doing here. So what that project is a 2-lane roundabout. It is on the East Coast, and it is on an intersection, a major intersection on a state route. So you can imagine there is a significant amount of traffic increase. It was prior to the roundabout going in, it was already signalized. And it was signalized in what we call a split phase fashion, a 4-way split phase, which means every leg of that intersection operated independently and on its own. So you can imagine when you're letting only eastbound traffic go at once, you're not going to have much accidents prior to the roundabout going in. And a lot of what you see on the East Coast, they have what are called, I believe, rotaries out there, which similar to roundabouts, except they have an actual add lane that you drive into, and then you merge across the roundabout to get to where you want to go. So you have a relearning curve with drivers on the East Coast when you're introducing something like this, which is different from what they have been experiencing at other locations. And this particular location was the first roundabout of its kind in that particular area. So again, another learning curve with drivers using it. That is not the situation we have here. This is a single lane roundabout. There was also some comments in that article about costing escalation. A significant portion of that, again, because it's a 2-lane roundabout, at a state route intersection with the main street of a town, there was right-of-way acquisition to the tune of $3 to $6 million in their estimates. So that's always going to drive up the cost. This particular project does not have any right-of-way acquisition with it. So if we can go on. So back in November, we talked about why should we do a roundabout. So a big piece of that is the study information in there. And what you're seeing in the studies that have been done by the Federal Highway Administration and the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety is that roundabouts are far safer than traditional stop or signal controlled intersections. They do reduce the accidents. And a big piece of that is that they reduce the severity of the accidents. So that third column is the fatalities. So you're looking at a almost 90% reduction in fatalities at an intersection. So that is a big plus in why we would want to go to a roundabout at this particular location instead of the multi-lane four-way stop that existed prior to. In addition, so some of the vehicle safeties, again, I talked about severity of the accidents. So in a normal all-way stop control or signal controlled intersection, you have your right angle accidents or T-bone accidents, you have your approach turn accidents. Those tend to be a little bit higher speed. Somebody's either running a light, not seeing a light change, running the stop sign, and they're hitting the other car. In a roundabout, you have primarily what's called a side swipe. Now, at the same time, the design for the roundabout, the way that the approach and the exit is designed is to slow the traffic down at those points as well. So when we get to concerns about pedestrian, so this is an example of what you have as conflict points in a typical intersection for both vehicles and pedestrians versus what are the conflict points for vehicles and pedestrians in a roundabout. And you can see it's significantly less. So you have much less chance of accidents happening in a roundabout. Not to say that they will never happen, but much, much reduced.
Councilmember Baggett.
Quick question. Ingrid, are they proposing to put any kind of shrubbery or anything in that center area?
There is some landscaping in that center
I
area.
would caution against putting things out there that are too high because it restricts the visibility. And the one that we put up there on 124th, which I had spoken to Councilmember Wagner many times long before I had political aspirations. Because of an injury that we had there, that's what brought that whole thing about. A young man was killed out there, even though it was determined it was his fault. But I've noticed that the growth of those shrubberies that were put in there are definitely a sight hazard. Going back to the one that you showed before about the pedestrian safety and all of that kind of stuff, if most of you who have ever driven on I Street down by the SARS Market, you notice we do have another crosswalk or some kind of a means to go across the street from one side to the other. I would hazard a guess, my guess, 90% of the people that cross that street never uses that particular thing. They are jaywalking in different areas. And I've seen a lot of near-miss accidents because a lot of the people that cross over there are almost daring the cars to hit them, notwithstanding some homeless individuals that are pushing carts. But they don't use that. So, I mean, a lot of these studies are really good, but it's only good if the people use those things where they're intended. The one up on 124th, and I'm just as guilty as some of the other people, cross over to the center island to get where they want to go rather than go across the crosswalk. Just a point of...
And I understand what the comments are. My comment back would be in all of those situations, they're crossing one lane of traffic instead of 4 or 6 lanes of traffic. So on the next slide, you'll see the pedestrian safety, what we talked about back in November, and why the roundabout is a more appropriate treatment for here than the multi-lane four-way stop that we have out there today. So you can see on the first slide, 82 feet to cross that street for a pedestrian to walk across. They're crossing 4 lanes of traffic. You're crossing 3 people stopping potentially going southbound on I Street, all of them trying to figure out whether it's their turn to go. Their first priority is not to look for that pedestrian when they're trying to make that decision. The difference with the roundabout is your pedestrian is crossing one lane of traffic, and they're only having to look in one direction, and then they have a refuge area in the middle before they cross the next direction. We're crossing them outside of the main part of the roundabout because you want it to be somewhere where the driver is not making their driving decision. You want them to be able to pay attention to where that pedestrian is. And there are standards in place that define how far back that crosswalk should be based upon the speed and design of the roundabout. I would also add that this is designed for 25-mile-an-hour speeds, whereas the roundabout in the article that you received from the gentleman today is a 35-mile-an-hour design. So, again, two different situations, not the same situation.
Well, the quickest point between 2 points, I guess if I'm not phrasing this correctly, is a straight line. And I'll tell you right now, the people are going to take the shortcut. They won't bother with a crosswalk. Unfortunately, this is human engineering. They just won't do it.
It's hard to fix stupid.
I was going to say, we can only build safe facilities for them. It's up to the individual to choose to use them or not.
It's true.
Well, have you considered the pedestrian management fence that I mentioned?
We have not included that in this current design. Again, in any of these situations, they'll be crossing one lane of traffic wherever that one lane is happening. We can certainly monitor it to see, but the fencing along the curb line creates its own difficulties when it comes to maintenance of facilities, especially sidewalks where we can't get to what gets trapped behind that fence.
Councilmember Pelosi.
Ingrid, you mentioned 25 and 35. Explain that again.
25 miles per hour? So this
I
is
know what it means, but in relation to the roundabout.
So the design standards for designing a roundabout depends upon the speeds that you're expecting cars to both come and leave at. So our roundabout for this location is designed based upon a 25-mile-an-hour speed. As you come into that, you're actually slowing them down even further than that as they're making their decision to go around the roundabout and then come out. The roundabout in the article is a 35-mile-an-hour design speed with, again, 2 lanes of traffic going around it. So much more complex design.
Councilmember DeCoursey.
So will there be speed signs posted, or are we just going to let the natural traffic pattern slow the traffic down?
So the way a roundabout works, the natural traffic pattern should slow the traffic down because of the angles that you're bringing those cars into the intersection in. Our code and our signage is it's 25 miles an hour unless it's otherwise posted, so we don't typically go and post specifically for 25.
The reason I ask is, although it's not the greatest design roundabout, the one up on Beasley Canyon has a sign that says 15 miles an hour. Of course, nobody does that. But it does warn you that the speed is slowing down as you get closer to the roundabout.
And that's a King County design roundabout. I can't speak to what they designed or didn't design into that.
Councilmember Wagner.
That particular roundabout didn't have a sign at the start, and the guy went straight in the creek. So we put up a sign. And so I think a sign is a good idea, personally.
Yeah, I do too. Like 15 miles an hour.
Maybe with a couple of flashing red lights.
Ingrid, I really appreciate this second explanation to us because I try to remember it all, but I don't always, and thank you very much.
So the other thing we talked about in November too was bicycle safety. So with the roundabout and with what we've designed in here, bicycle trying to go through that area actually has 2 choices. They can stay in the lane and act like a car, or they can actually go up the side ramps that we've provided in there and use the sidewalks and use the crosswalks. So they really have 2 different ways to go through the process, and it's really based upon their comfort level. So also back in November, we showed you what the design costs and the anticipated construction costs at that time were. At that time, we had not received the grant for construction, and we were estimating that the total project cost was going to be about $1.77 million. Where we're at today, so the approved multi-year project budget is about $1.89 million. Our total estimated cost today is $1.78. We have gone up about $14,000. Which is about 0.79% of the overall project, which I'm quite proud of my staff and how well they have done on maintaining that. So I've also shown here kind of what those funds are made of. So we have grants, both state and federal grants. We have water funds for water utility work that's being done as part of this, sewer funds for sewer work that's being done as part of this. and the matching street funds for the grant. So the majority of the funding for this project is actually through grants. So if the city were to choose to not move forward with this project, which we have already executed construction contracts for, the city would have to give back the grants as well as pay back about $214,000 that we've already spent of grant funds. The city would also have to pay the contractor to cancel the contract. And I don't have a number on that, and I would hesitate to put a guess on that because that would be a negotiated settlement. And there's also the potential that this will detrimentally impact our ability to get grants in the future. Granting agencies that are providing grants for pedestrian safety don't like to see us not continue and move forward and do the projects. So that certainly weighs in when they consider us again in the future.
Councilmember Baggett.
One final question. I think you may recall I asked a question at one time about change orders, and that someone, Mr. Wells to be exact.
There have been no change orders. In
You
his
probably saw his email, which
in
indicated.
his message to you, he quotes 1.4 million jumping to 2.4 million.
Yeah.
And I don't know where he's getting his numbers from. So if you look at, if you were actually to add up the numbers here, so back in November of 2016, the construction phase is about 1.4 million of the total project. So that would be where I'm assuming he's getting his 1.4 is just from the construction dollars themselves, not the whole project cost, but just construction.
He lives in my community and with Claude, and I see him about every week or so. And the question does come up more frequently than the email that everyone saw. So I just want to be sure that I'm quoting the right kind of numbers.
You are. So it was 1.77 in November, and it's 1.78 now is what our estimated costs are. Our budget actually exceeds that right now, so we have more contingency in the project than what we have as our anticipated costs for this project.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ingrid.
Agreed.
We're going to move on. Is there any other discussion items? New business? Okay, let's look at the matrix. Yes, Councilmember Plaza.
So the shopping carts then would go into 2018?
Yes.
March.
February, March.
I see Dana's already left, and I was going to ask her about setting up a meeting with her here before.
Oh, well, you probably can just, you can.
I'll send her an
probably
email.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, I think that Ingrid just adjourned the meeting. No. Other changes?
Well, you can remove 12 and 13.
Okay.
The shopping carts that go, what, first quarter of 2018?
Yes.
Something like that.
Yeah. Okay, with that, I'm going to adjourn the meeting. Thank you.